All right. Technical difficulties. For some reason, I don't know. Everything just went down. I'm not entirely sure why, but don't want to We're back here again. This will be when we kind of go through and discuss this, and I'm going to chop this up into some videos. But to start back from where I was, because I know that the last year I'm probably just going to hide. I'm here to defend Brandon Beane on my own because I am seeing a ton of opinions out there that the decision to fire McDermott but keep Brandon Beane is one that makes no sense, and that I guess everyone is consensus opinion that Brandon Beane should have been fired. And I guess that I'm the lone dissenter to that idea. I personally think if you were going to make a move, I didn't think that you had to, but if you were going to make a move, firing McDermott over Beane this offseason was the correct decision, despite what most other people are saying. So I do want to go over it. I don't want to be seen that I'm like absolutely 100% defending Brandon Beane, that he's like this perfect GM or even a great GM at this point. I do think though that the decision to move on from McDermott over Beane was the right decision for this specific season, and I can lose entire faith in Beane by the time this offseason ends. But for right now, in this moment, the consensus around it is just baffling to me. So just to go over it, the reason why I don't think Brandon Beane should have been fired this offseason, why he hasn't been, is that you signed up for a plan, right? So there was a 2-year retool plan when it came to Brandon Beane and his construction of the roster that was all in push. We agreed that the roster was good enough to go win Super Bowl. You lose in 13 seconds to the Chiefs. The Chiefs come in and beat you by a missed field goal in the divisional round after that. And at that point, your core of players, the core that you're building this team around, is a disgruntled, aging Stephon Diggs, aging safeties, and a Matt Milano who keeps getting hurt, like a bunch of players that were old, aging, and had high cap demands on their contracts. So you come in and basically say, we're going to move on from these guys who maybe are our top talented players, our core players, a year early than when you maybe want to move on from them. But you're going to do this so that you can take dead cap hits earlier on and then free it up by the time this upcoming offseason comes through. So this is going to be year 3 of that plan. And everyone was on board with that. Everyone was saying that was the idea. All the popular media outlets were like, oh, look at the Bills on paper. They're terrible. And everyone was like, okay, well, this is not going to be the year we're going to win the Super Bowl. We understand that. We have to make some decisions. And people were on board with that idea and that plan. But the problem that happened was you made the AFC Championship game, and then you made the AFC Divisional round. Like, you raised the expectations because you then outperformed where you thought you were going to be coming into that season. So the problem now is that Brandon Beane is sticking with his plan going through that, which was having less talented rosters these past 2 seasons to be able to allow younger players to get starting roles or get more snaps and opportunities. And while they aren't up to the standard that people would want them to be, they're still developing and getting better. And then while also utilizing the cap space you do have available to you, because you have so much dead cap on your books, to re-sign your new core of players, your Greg Rousseaus, your James Cooks, your Khalil Shakirs, the tackle duo, Josh Allen, all these players that you're at Oliver is another extension they handed out, Christian Benford. Like, that's going to be your new core of players, opposed to what it used to be with Trey, the safeties, Diggs, etc. So that is where the moves were made these past 2 seasons, what people are like, oh, this core isn't, or this team isn't talented enough because you've spent all your money retaining your core pieces and not bringing in new pieces from the outside of the organization that are established veterans from free agency to improve the relative rest of the roster. So I do think that the plan has gone to perfect, like what he expected the plan to go to, maybe not perfection because the draft picks could have been better, especially the last 2 drafts, not the most recent one, the 2 previous, but the free agency dollars, the spending money has all been what has been used, what they expected to be. We're now moving into year 3 of that plan, which is where you want it to be, where it was planned to be. So for me, the plan was always to take on that dead cap. And then this season, you went from having $75 million 2 years ago in dead cap, $37 million this past season in dead cap. Now you're at $35 million right now in dead cap from borrowing money from past signings, whether it's Larry Ogunjobi signing or Mike Hoyt signing, all the other extensions and stuff you've handed on the past season. Next year, you are currently on the books for $0 in dead cap money. So you have with once you restructure contracts and adjusting to signing bonuses and stuff, you have a significant amount of cap space here, 7 draft picks, and an untapped amount of dead cap money in the future seasons to sign more players this offseason. You now have your core of players signed on, and the amount of cap space you wanted to have the past 2 seasons is now full and abundant for you. You have a ton of resources now available to you in what was lining up with the plan that Brandon Beane initially put out there. Now, I'm not the biggest Brandon Beane fan, especially with his free agency signing, so I want to go over some of the last 5 or 6 off seasons just to establish that I'm not bootlicking here. I'm not saying he's never done anything wrong. And in fact, his free agency signings, I've actively disliked the majority of them. Just to go through the list here, I went through and picked off like the top spent money or some of the guys who have contributed the most from his signings here, or I guess the least with the most amount of dollars committed. Back in 2020, which was kind of a weird year with free agency, I would only give him like Darrell Williams as a good signing because he ended up being a starting offensive lineman for this team. You had Mario Addison, Vernon Butler, Quentin Jefferson, AJ Klein getting some of your high dollar contracts, which was like I didn't understand that as much. I guess the team was still kind of figuring itself out. Hadn't hit that high peak yet. They just lost to the Texans in the playoffs, and now 2020 was the real year they started the blossom and Josh Allen took over. So moving forward, then 2021, you signed Emmanuel Sanders. Great signing there. They didn't do a ton of big fish signings this one or in this offseason. I do think this was maybe the year they did the contract extensions for the 2017 players. So you could kind of excuse the fact they didn't throw around a lot of money in free agency, but at the same time, walking out of it with Emmanuel Sanders and Mitchell Trubisky as your backup are your 2 best signings, where you also threw a good amount of money at Bobby Hart. I'm not the biggest fan of that either. 2022, this is where you get Daquan Jones, Sam Martin, and I put Tim Settle here. Tim Settle wasn't a great Buffalo Bill, but the fact that you identified and found that player, it wasn't on him that his utilization wasn't to the best there. He did find Tim Settle at a good price. We now know that Tim Settle is a good NFL player, so won't dock him for that. But then you have the Von Miller signing and the Roger Saffold signing, which this offseason we're currently talking about going into 2026, where you have money to spend, was done previously with that Von Miller contract. And it looked good for the first 8 weeks Von was there. Maybe that by year 3 of that contract in his final season before the voids kicked in, it would have went downhill because of age regardless. But the fact that his one lone great season got cut in half because of a torn ACL, and you had to spend the rest of his career as a Buffalo Bill rebounding from that and having to try to come back from that, makes it look like a terrible signing, which it is because of that. You can't, hindsight is 2020. At the time, it was kind of questionable, and then it kind of looked good because of the first 8 weeks. Torn ACL happens. All right, that's a bad contract. We'll file that under bad contracts. And then Roger Saffold, another player that got a ton of money thrown at him, didn't really fix the guard position at that point in time anyway. 2023, though, this was a phenomenal free agency class. This is the one I think he knocked out of the park above and beyond. With Connor McGovern, Leonard Floyd, Poona Ford, again, another player that wasn't utilized particularly well for the Bills, but is a good player that he threw money at that you can't really argue is not a good player right now, despite the fact whether or not he was a good player for the Bills. That's more coaching utilization than it was him identifying that player and bringing them in for a good contract. Taylor Rapp, who is continuing to be the starting safety for this team when he's not hurt. And then David Edwards. So you had 2 offensive line starters, Leonard Floyd, who was an edge starter that season, and then Poona Ford, who was a good player, just not for your team, and apparently just couldn't get in with that coaching staff for that year. And then you had the Jordan Poyer re-signing him for the second time, and then Deontay Hardy, really kind of just peanuts when it comes to bad moves. I think Jordan Poyer was fine depth. He just wasn't great on that extension for that season. And then Deontay Hardy was only lasted 1 year as your punt returner. Didn't really contribute a ton on offense. Moving to 2024, you bring Trubisky back after his spell in Pittsburgh. And you bring in Matt Collins, another weak free agency class here because you had a decent amount of money. And this was the year when you first moved off of Diggs and you started that reset. And this is the first year of that retool offseason where you're saying, okay, we're not going to spend a ton of money on outside free agents. We're going to bring in guys we think contribute, but we're going to spend most of our money on retaining our players that we want to build up the next core with. So you bring in Trubisky, you bring in Matt Collins. Those are 2 good players for that one season. But you spend $10 million a year on Curtis Samuel. You'd sign Austin Johnson to a decently large contract for a depth tackle. Mike Edwards, who doesn't end up playing a snap for you, and DeJuan Smoot, who was kind of up and down and got too much money to be in the role that he was in. I do think that offseason was not great, especially the Curtis Samuel signing really drags that down. You knew he was injury prone before you signed him, and you threw $10 million in him. You didn't have a ton of money, like we just said. You were rationing that more towards re-signing your own players. and you only had a certain amount of money to throw at veterans, and you chose Curtis Samuel to be the player to get the $10 million a year because you thought him plus Keon plus some of the other pieces you'll bring in will make up for the fact that you lost Diggs, and it just didn't. Now, that didn't severely hamper the roster because Josh Allen ends up winning MVP, and some of those guys make big plays and play their part, but I don't think $10 million a year for Curtis Samuel is ever going to look like a good contract. Now, this past free agency, again, still in the second year of you don't have a ton of resources. You have to focus on re-signing your own guys, but you can have a little bit of money to spend out in free agency. So you give $10 million a year to Jordan Palmer or Justin Palmer. I think that is you can't make a firm decision on that yet. Like, he was injury prone for the Chargers, sure, but not to the point that he was this year. There was some freak stuff going on with his ankle. I don't know if he ever was fully healthy following that Falcons game, but I have some more like enthusiasm for that signing moving forward. We'll just have to see if he can stay healthy. And it's less than $10 million. It was 9.9 for this past season. I see a lot of people saying like that they're pissed off about that one because that wasn't a fix for the wide receiver room. I don't know who they wanted us to sign because outside of the top three, there were top three guys signed this offseason. Stephon Diggs, who got paid $22 million a year. Devontae Adams, another 22, and then Kupp, who got 18. We didn't have the money for that, nor would if you saw that they gave Cooper Kupp $18 million a year. I think that would have gotten way more backlash than the Justin Palmer one would have gotten, personally. So I think that them going 9.9 for Justin Palmer was the correct move there. Even if it didn't end up working out for this season, I do think he offers you something as a depth or a deeper, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type player at that contract, especially with the way that wide receiver contracts are currently running. You also signed Hoyt, who was phenomenal in his 2 games. And the reason that he was a good signing despite the 6-game suspension you knew ahead of time of was because you signed him with a 3-year contract. 6 games of, theoretically, if he performed in all 2.5 seasons after that, 6 games is not the majority. He ends up tearing his Achilles, so that doesn't really work out that way. But you're really signing him to that, a 2-year contract. I do think Hoyt is going to be worth that price. I'm willing to already plant my ground in that being a good signing. Bosa, regardless of what people say, was good this season. He was one of the top leaders in forced fumbles, had some pass rush production when no one else could. The fact that he was just like the lone guy to generate any kind of pass rush in a team that had nobody else helping him out. Like, Greg Rousseau is a fine pass rusher. I don't think he's anything special. He needs to be the number 2, but he's a great run defender. Joey Bosa flipped around, was trying to be the sole generator of pass rush, and I don't think that was going to be able to work out. But for a guy that could be a starter for you consistently, didn't get hurt for the majority of the season. I know he missed a few weeks in the middle there. I do think that was a plus signing for what they needed him to come in and do. And then Trey White, just regardless of all the conversation around bringing old Bills back, I do think Trey White was a plus signing. He really did regain some of his form from being with the Bills. He was a really good player for most of the season, especially if you consider him being a CB3 or like a CB2.5, I guess. If Maxwell Harrison doesn't get hurt, that signing looks even better. But the fact that Trey White, manned that CB2 spot for the majority of the season, the fact he brought him in that small of a contract in that offseason, I do think that was a plus signing, regardless if he was a former Bill or not. If his name wasn't Trey White, but just some other guy you brought in for that cap hit, and then he performed this well during the season, people would be applauding that move more so than they are anything else. Now, there are some negative moves. I know I said Palmer's more of a question mark. Ogunjobi, even though you didn't know about his 6-week suspension until after you signed him, wasn't really a factor there. That was really just disappointing. I was a fan of his as a player when he was in the Steelers or on the Bengals, and even the Browns. He was in all the AFC North teams. I just think that he just didn't perform up to any kind of contract whatsoever. So I was just a dud signing, even if it wasn't going to be tapping into the dead cap for this upcoming offseason. Elijah Moore was touted as like the savior of this wide receiver core by people who were dying for a wide receiver, especially after that rant Brandon Beane had on WGR, which I will not condone. That was not a great look PR-wise, but regardless, Elijah Moore comes in. Everyone's like, it's proved they needed the wide receiver. And then he didn't do a lick of anything and got outperformed by Brandon Cooks later in the season. And then Derek Forrest, I had some higher upside or higher. I thought there was higher upside with Derek Forrest as a signing for the safety room, maybe taking over as for Taylor Rapp. But he didn't even end up making a roster. So not a great signing there either. And that was one of the higher paid, was at $1.4 million was that signing. So yes, a lot of bargain bin free agency dives here. The 1 year where he did take swings with Von Miller and Daquan Jones and Roger Saffold, and that was an offseason where I do think he hit some. Like Daquan Jones is a phenomenal signing. That's probably his best signing he's had on his list outside of like, I don't know, can you think of a better one? Like Taylor Rapp, maybe, Connor McGovern, David Edwards. Like those are his plus signings. But for the most part, he's bargain bin diving and he's not finding players that are going to be like, recurring, have outperformed their contracts, getting a second contract type players outside of the ones I just named. So I do think that giving him some more resources may help with that, but I've also never really had confidence in him as a free agency player. We'll see how that goes. Like I said, I'm not defending Brandon Beane as an overall GM. I'm just defending the decision of keeping him moving forward. So moving on to his draft picks, I think this has been gravely overstated about how bad of a drafter he is. I'm going to pull these up so that way we can also see we can go one by one through the draft classes. Because I have been seeing the stupid 2 Pro Bowlers in 8 years as a GM, and like, oh, well, he's so terrible with drafting. And I'm just like, I can't get along with that, because even with that point with the Pro Bowlers, like that means it's a popularity contest. Spencer Brown hasn't won the popularity contest yet to be a Pro Bowl tackle. We all agree that he's worthy of being a Pro Bowl tackle, and he's a Brandon Beane pick. But that's the situation that we're in, is that they haven't won a popularity contest with some of their picks, and you're going to negatively influence your GM because of that. So here, we'll share this. So here are the draft picks for Brandon Beane from 2020 on, like we did with the free agencies. Let's go down to AJ Epinesa. Start there. First pick he had as a GM, or as GM in 2020. And yes, AJ Epinesa has not been a player that you would say was worthy of pick 54, where he ended up going. I do think that was probably a bit of a miss there, especially when it comes to looking around who else got picked there. But I do think, for me personally, grabbing if AJ Epinesa wants to come back on a decent enough contract, I do love what he does as a DN3 for this team. Like, that is a pick that I think was not a home run, but I wouldn't call it a bust either. I would define a bust as a player that can contribute to your team. Like, if they're able to come out and be a consistent contributor, that's a hit on a pick, regardless of where the pick lands. Like, even around 2, like, you'd hope for more. So I wouldn't call it a home run pick. But the fact that he is continuing to be a tenured Bill and has a role in this defense, I'm not going to call that a bad pick either. Zach Moss, that I'll give you that one. That one was rough. That one wasn't he ended up going, and when he got more opportunities and stayed healthy on other teams, he performed well enough. But I do think, even at the time, I thought that was an overdrafting of the player for round 3. Gabe Davis, immediately the first hit, like true, honest to God hit we have from this draft cycle, from this draft history, where you have a player you're drafting in the 4th round, was a consistent contributor for you on that offense, was one of the few wide receivers that you can defend him bringing in the draft as a 4th round pick. And like, he has higher upside than a lot of the other guys that were drafted ahead of him. And he ended up getting a $13 million a year contract from the Jags. And he continued to help the Bills up and through this recent playoff run. Like, that is a good pick. And again, that's another one, not a Pro Bowler, but had like phenomenal seasons, had phenomenal individual performances, especially in the playoffs of the Bills. Like, that is a good pick. Jake Fromm, I think that I would never kill a team for going with a pick that is, best player available on your board, and the fact that you have a quarterback there. Like, you already have quarterback Josh Allen, sure, but if you don't have to keep spending money on backups, you're hoping this guy develops into that. He was already consensus. Like, people were talking about him in like the 1st round or the 2nd round. He's in there in the 5th. I'm not going to get too mad about that pick. Even though it is a 5th rounder, because that there is just sometimes you take those picks, you take those swings with players like that. Tyler Bass, good pick. 6th round pick, is a consistent contributor. We'll see how he rebounds from this injury, but like, I'm not going to fault him on that pick. Isaiah Hodgins ends up being a good player for other NFL teams who are in the short term, but wasn't one for the Bills. I'll take the L on that one. He'll take the L on that one for not being a player for the Bills, because he ends up getting cut. But as a 6th round pick, okay, we're at that point now. And then Dane Jackson in the 7th. Dane Jackson played in the playoffs this year. Now, he wasn't great. I do think that that is a McDermott disciple type player, where that's a player that is not going to perform well outside of being under McDermott. And even to the point where he is with McDermott, there is like some struggles there. So I do think that that is a pick that plays above where he was drafted in the 7th round there. Can't argue with that one. 2021, Greg Rousseau. Definitely, when coming out, you have to remember when coming out, Greg Rousseau was a converted safety to defensive end. You were banking on a lot of upside because he did have good sack numbers, but it was a lot of slashing, working guys with athleticism and size and length, and just overpowering dudes at the college level. Like, he was not nearly refined at all. He's come into the league and refined a ton, and I would argue is one of, if not the best, run defending base end in the league right now. But his pass rushing is woefully subpar, especially for a player of his caliber where he was drafted, where you need him to be at. So while I do think this is a good pick, and I would never call this a bust, it's another one where it's not a home run with your first pick of that draft class. Boogie Basham, total whiff. I never understood that one. Was not a fan of Boogie Basham from my Wake Forest. I was very, very disappointed when watching this draft back and seeing that pick be the pick at with your 2nd round. Great. Spencer Brown in the 3rd round, home run, absolute home run. Another player, doesn't have any Pro Bowlers with their draft picks. I don't think Greg Rousseau's been a Pro Bowler either. Like, 2 players that I think are worthy of being in consideration for Pro Bowls, and I'm pretty sure either one or both of them have been alternates at one point. Maybe not Greg Rousseau. I think Spencer Brown definitely has been. But Spencer Brown, it was an absolute home run selection where I wasn't a big fan of it. A lot of people weren't because he was so raw, and like even early on when he was starting, that was a struggle for him. But he developed into probably one of, if not the best right tackle. Probably one of them. I think Penei Sewell is definitely better than him, but one of the best right tackles in the NFL. They have a top 5 tackle duo because of this draft pick here. Tommy Doyle, unfortunate what happened to him with injuries, but that was a 5th round pick. Stevenson, again, another guy, 6th round pick, injuries, really didn't stand out much. Again, a 6th round pick there. Damar Hamlin, regardless of this is going to be one of the players that makes me the most like violent when arguing with people, because people will say Damar Hamlin is terrible and awful and doesn't deserve to be on the team. And I think it's solely because he had so much publicity because of the heart thing that happened that you have to view him as adequate depth. There's no way you can view him as other than like a good depth safety. He was forced into starting, has a decent amount of starts for your team as a 6th round pick. And while he didn't perform at a high level, I do think when you're looking at a guy that can come in and you're like, okay, one of our safeties go down in a game, Damar Hamlin can come in. You can do significantly worse. You can do Darnell Savage. Like, Damar Hamlin was in over Darnell Savage. I don't know if that play goes the way it does in the divisional playoff round. Rashad Wildgoose played well for like the Giants. Was immediately cut by the Bills, so that one can't really give him anything there. Same thing with Jack Anderson, back-to-back later round picks. Now this is the 2021 draft. You just made the 2021 or the 2020 jump in your team's production, and you have a good roster at this point. I do think that this team was struggling to find places for rookies and lower end players to make it on the roster. So cutting your 6th and 7th round draft picks and try to stash them on your practice squad isn't the worst thing in the world, especially if you are a good team that people are trying to poach a lot of your players off of just because they know that you're good now. Here's the big one. Kyrie Elam. Another one. I don't think we've hit on a first draft pick of a class yet. Kyrie Elam was terrible. Hated that pick when it happened. Didn't think he was scheme fit at all. And I saw the idea, and it's a similar idea we'll get to when we talk about drafting Maxwell Harrison, but the idea of Kyrie Elam just didn't fit, even when you want to look for like a higher upside player at your CB2. Like, that just wasn't where you needed to go with that pick. I'm so mad that the Chiefs sniped Trent McDuffie out from under us. He was my favorite player for the Bills in that class. And the fact that you went with Kyrie Elam as a panic replacement because he was your only other 1st round grade, that's just not good GMing right there. But then you bounce back. James Cook in the 2nd, Terrell Bernard in the 3rd. Reminder, we have 2 Pro Bowlers drafted. James Cook and I think not Dan Dawkins, or is it just Josh Allen? Josh Allen and James Cook are the 2 Pro Bowlers that were drafted by Brandon Beane. The fact that Terrell Bernard has never gotten Pro Bowl looks, despite he had a bad season this year, not going to argue that, but he's had good seasons in the past. And he is the leader of that defense. I think that is a good pick. Khalil Shakir, never got a Pro Bowl nod. Matt Araiza, again, that was kind of a weird pick with the whole situation that came out afterwards. If you would have, been able to weather the storm and have him on your roster, I don't think you're complaining about the punter being the pick there, especially with how hyped he was by the Bills fans in that preseason. Christian Benford, probably his best single pick outside of him and Spencer Brown, phenomenal picks. top tier players at their respective positions. I do think that the fact that he also hasn't been a Pro Bowler is ridiculous. So, like, again, 2 Pro Bowlers in 8 years of drafting. I've already named like 3 players I think should have also been in the Pro Bowl. Luke Tenuta, that one was irredeemable. Hated Luke Tenuta, was the lowest graded player I had graded up to that point. Don't understand that pick at all, and it kind of reflected that he didn't even make the team. And then Balen Spector, who again constantly injured, isn't really a significant contributor, but he's your 53 of 53 players on a roster, can be a core special teamer. With a 7th round pick, the fact that he's still around and got snaps in that game against the Broncos is just a testament to he's a good depth player. Like, that's a good bottom of your roster player. Dalton Kincaid. I will not hear that Dalton Kincaid was a miss at the top of that draft class. Has he been available? No, but the significant amount of injuries he's suffered at the NFL level was not reflective in his college upbringing. Like, he was a tight end that was new to the sport, available for the Utah Utes, and when he's been on the field and healthy, he's been living up to everything you wanted from that pick and more. You cannot try to predict those kinds of injuries that he's been suffering. There are a lot of times it's just freak injuries that happen, and there was nothing to indicate that was going to be happening to Dalton Kincaid coming out of that draft process. I think the process of drafting Dalton Kincaid and some of the results have been what you'd expected for that level of pick. Then you have Osiris Torrance. He's been a player that's been a starter for you since he came into the league, is going to get $20+ million in the open market next season. I'm not his biggest fan, but I can't argue that he is a starter level guard in the NFL. Dorian Williams, someone who's going to be stepping into a heavier role this upcoming season, with losing Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard coming off injury and trying to move around and get guys to mix and match, and depending on what the defensive coordinator situation is going to look like moving forward. Another good pick here. Justin Shorter, never understood that one. I made a video on this channel talking about how Justin Shorter is the replacement for Gabe Davis because of the skill set, but he was definitely far behind when it comes to polish or anything like that, and ends up transitioning to tight end for like the Raiders. And you miss on Puka Nacua, who was one of my favorite guys. So I do think that that pick was a miss. And then Nick Broker, Alex Austin, depth pieces who have had time in the NFL and are still in the NFL on rosters to this point, but nothing too crazy there. 2024, Keon Coleman, miss. Was a miss the minute that pick got made. The idea that Keon Coleman was the player that you thought could come in, and I know Josh Allen loved him, and I know that as a player, he filled the need, especially for a roster that had a lot of smaller wide receivers, and you wanted to bring that kind of skill set into the lineup. That was just not the player you needed at that moment in time, and should have made a better decision there. And I don't know why they fell in love with him, whether it was a draft interview, whether it was the advanced combine, like athleticism statistics that were going around. That was a blanket whiff, and I could have told you that from the second that you drafted him. I was not a fan of that pick at all. But he bounces back. Cole Bishop. I've been a fan of Cole Bishop since he was at Utah. Last year wasn't his best, and I felt like he was coming along a lot slower than I thought he would be. But the fact that he finally came around, and once you had a good running mate with him, he started to show up and develop more. He's going to be a big player for this next upcoming season, where in your plan, you're moving on to year 3 of that plan, where you're hoping that some of these young players are developing and taking on roles above where they were previous, and kind of building that talent through growth. Cole Bishop is going to be a big player for that. Dwayne Carter, wasn't the biggest fan of that draft pick. Don't think he had the best season last year, but we couldn't really see what happened this year because he got injured in preseason. So, I mean, we'll see where he is coming up next year. Imagine what the depth of D tackle would have looked like if you, instead of having Dwayne Carter on IR and I'll ever get hurt early, and the TG Sanders having to play D end, you had all those guys healthy and ready to go. And I think Daquan Jones was hurt consistently this season as well. Like, we had a ton of injuries on the interior defensive line before the season even started. So then you have Ray Davis, big fan of Ray Davis, obviously all-pro kick returner this year. I do think he has more to offer. The offense as a running back, as he gets better, he's kind of fluctuating his weight a bit right now, trying to find his play style in the NFL. I do think he is another player that's going to be going on the upswing moving forward. Cedric Van Pran-Granger, this is going to be your starting center for the Buffalo Bills next season. There's no reason outside of some weird character considerations that happened in that draft cycle why he should have been in the 5th round. He should have been a 3rd round draft pick. This is going to be your starting center with Alec Anderson as your starting guard moving forward. I think this was a phenomenal pick for where he was drafted. Edifon Ulufosio, miss. I'll call that a miss. I wasn't a big fan of his. I'm a Washington fan, and I didn't really love him at Washington. I love the story. Walk on turned starter, but like I didn't really see it with him coming out of that class, and that was a miss there. Javon Solomon, also thought that was going to be a miss. I had friends that really liked him in the process coming out of Troy. I never really saw it, especially for this team. I felt like they wanted to bring that skill set they were missing to the edge room, and he just never really developed in the way that they thought he was going to. So I do think that is also, we can consider that another fifth-round miss there. Tylen Grable. Tylen Grable is going to be a good offensive lineman for this team if he can stay healthy. Like, this is another player between Alec Anderson, Cedric Hammer, and Granger. You're going to find a player that is going to step in and be a starter for this team, I think, out of those three guys. Tylen Grable, injuries have just been an issue, but I do think that is a stud pick right there. Daquan Hardy, looking more for the return side of it. He just hasn't been able to stick, and Travis Clayton can't really make a big opinion on that. Really late 7th-round pick. Trying to bank on that Jordan Mailata transfer, rugby type players type thing. I'm not going to bang him too hard on that. Now, finally, this is the draft class I will go to bat for the most. You've heard me say in draft classes that we've covered already, I wasn't a big fan of that player coming out. Don't really understand why he made that pick. And it turns out it wasn't a great pick. Or even ones that he liked more than I did and ended up being a good pick. This draft class, I was entirely aligned with where these selections were. I loved where all these picks happened. Maxwell Harrison, I was a big Harrison fan. Let me talk about Max for a second. Let me go back to solo. If you are trying to use injuries as a reason why this pick was not a good pick, you're wrong. If you're trying to argue that he wasn't a good tackler coming out, why the hell did we draft a corner that couldn't tackle? You're wrong. In 2023, if you watch the tape of Maxwell Harrison in 2023, he was a willing and violent tackler for his size. He was willing to throw his shoulder into anybody that moved in front of him, on top of being a stud athlete and showing up in coverage because of that athleticism. I will not hear any slander on Max Harrison because he had a severe shoulder injury that he played through and gutted through in 2024 that caused him to regress as a tackler because he could not use both shoulders to tackle. And then you come into the NFL and you're like, oh, well, he had a shoulder injury. That's injury history right there. The injuries that he sustained this season, an LCL sprain and an ankle sprain, neither of which are indicative of a guy with lack of size or he has no injury history with those injuries himself. Those are freak injuries that happen to guys from all body sizes. And the fact that he sustained those does not just take away from the fact that this is a good pick. And the idea was to get another talented corner opposite Christian Benford. Because if Sean McDermott can make chicken salad out of chicken shit with 6th-round corners, what happens when you give him a highly talented 1st-round corner opposite Christian Benford? You're hoping that it becomes a stud duo where no one's going to be able to throw on you at all. Now, Harrison was hurt. Trey White performed admirably in recovery for him. But I do think that was a good pick in the fact that anybody who's talking about him not being a good tackler or him being consistently injury prone doesn't know ball. I am flat out going to say that right now. That is my strongest you don't know ball take is if you have those opinions of Maxwell Harrison at this point in his career. Like maybe he proves those things right moving forward, but if you have those opinions based off of what's going on with what happened this season and his final season in college, I won't stand for that. TJ Sanders, 2nd-round pick. Bit high for my boy. I think I had him as like a lower 2nd-round grade or a 3rd-round grade just because I felt like he wasn't a phenomenal run defender, but he was like that gap-shooting Buffalo Bills style D-tackle. They liked him a lot. I'm not going to fault that pick. He ends up having to be like an edge for this team because of how many injuries happen across the D-line. And I think that kind of negatively impacted how people are going to view him this season. But I do still think he has a ton of high upside talent as an interior pass rusher and as a gap shooting run defender moving forward. Landon Jackson, somebody who fit the timeline of the Bills, wanting to get guys who are maybe some more project type players but have high upside. With his pass rush, he had size and length, coming off of a season-ending neck injury to end his college career. And then he is recovering, is a little bit slower to come along, finally gets an opportunity to play because of injuries, and then tears his ACL. Like, there's nothing really you can take away from Landon Jackson this season other than hopefully he continues to develop and get stronger, and he comes back and avoids another freak injury like that. Deion Walker outperformed even what I thought. This is a pick that I didn't like. I kind of let the buzz around Deion Walker and what everyone else was saying about him kind of lowered me down from the original 3rd round grade I had from him when I watched him earlier in that season at Kentucky. And then I ended up getting to like a 6th round grade. This is a 4th round pick. I'm like, oh wow, they overdrafted him, and he ends up being a stud for where they drafted him, and he is living up to what people thought he could be the year previous. And like I even when they made that pick, I said that the fact that that is a player that was going in top 10s of mock drafts in the preseason, and then now you have him falling to the 4th because of a back injury. You're hoping he recovers from that and he finds that old kind of flame he had to make him a 1st round type caliber player. And so far, it seems like he's kind of becoming a better player than where he was originally drafted. Jordan Hancock. I know that the Jag game happened, and it was an upsetting thing to see him get immediately picked on in that game. I probably could even pull up my scouting report on him I have in here, because that was another player that I was a big fan of, especially when it came to a Teron Johnson replacement. Like, I originally graded him as a corner, then I looked at him as a safety, and I was like, I think he's a slot corner type player that had good athleticism. Like, another guy that's kind of lower. Here, I'll just read it. Hancock is a safety / slot corner hybrid player who fits best as a slot player in the NFL, who has the experience of flexing into a deep rotation that can bring him some versatility for the NFL teams. Smooth hips with a good overall athletic profile, will have upside because of that. Good recovery speed, change of direction is at a high level to mirror and match. Willing to be physical in coverage and when coming up to play the run. Aggressive tackler who likes to hit. Anticipation for routes in man and zone is on the weaker side, needs to be coached up, should be much more dominant in coverage as good of an athlete as he is. Ball skills struggle, often gets caught grabbing and not turning to track the ball, and it shows up with lack of production across the board. Has a lean frame, brings good length, but may struggle with the physicality of outside receivers in the NFL. Will be a good athlete who will need to be coached up, like him in a slot role where he can play close to the line of scrimmage, zones where he can play like him close to the line of scrimmage zones where he can rally and tackle on shorter routes. Is also capable enough athlete that can match in man on slots, and when he learns to dial up blitzes and needs players to win one-on-one battles. So I do think, for me, he is a player that was going to be the projected replacement for Teron Johnson. The fact he was thrown out there at safety in his rookie season, I don't think he was up to the level of playing that role, and I never really thought that even in my analysis. I thought like he could maybe be a developmental safety type player, but his true role was at slot. Playing closer to the line of scrimmage, not asking to be a deeper half of the field defender. So with that in mind, I don't think that this year he should have been playing all that much as he did at safety. And you saw the results of that, especially in that Jags playoff game. Jackson Hawes, stud pick. Love that pick. Jackson Hawes in the 5th round where he was selected brought more to the Buffalo Bills offense than any wide receiver they could have drafted in that spot. There is no wide receiver they could have drafted at that point or later that would have brought as much impact to this offense, allowing them to play 13 personnel, allowing them to bring different elements to their offensive game. No wide receiver would have brought that same impact that Jackson Hawes brought. So even though they didn't have a great wide receiver room, I do think Jackson Hawes was their best addition to that offensive skill positions from this draft class. Dorian Strong, loved Dorian Strong. Thought he should have been a 3rd round pick, especially in a heavy zone system, especially in the Bills system. Like, that would have been a player that was a knock it out the park 6th round pick if he didn't have a maybe career-threatening neck injury. Imagine, again, talk about this with the D tackles. Your cornerback depth coming into the season is you're hoping that it's Christian Benford and then a platoon of Trey White and Max Harrison as Harrison comes along, eventually Harrison taking over as a starter as he gets more and more reps under his belt towards the end of the season. Then it's Trey White as cornerback 3, and then Dorian Strong as cornerback 4. You're not getting to Dane Jackson in the playoffs because you're now that's your cornerback. What would that be? 5 in that order. Your corner 5 gets cooked in for touchdown in the NFL playoffs. Like, that's the situation we were in. And even the Jamarcus Ingram probably would have played over him. And now that whole Darius Slay situation was some bullshit. Don't agree with that move, but the idea of that move was better, especially when you thought you had enough depth to cover for that. But regardless, Dorian Strong should have been a home run pick. Injury, unfortunately, played a big role in that for this season and probably moving forward. Chase Slant, wasn't a big fan of that pick, is on the practice squad. And then Caden Prather, again, not a big fan of that pick either. I think this 2025 draft class is one of the best he's going to have. Like, that is going to be something that shows up moving forward, this whole 2-year retool plan into year 3 of adding pieces. Now you have your core, you have a bunch of young players that are developing. This 2025 draft class is going to be the one that really makes that plan flourish and work. You're hoping for maybe another step from Keon Coleman. I'm not going to hold out hope for that. But like Cole Bishop, hopefully Keon Coleman, some of the other guys, Dorian Williams taking a step up. There are a ton of players that you've drafted already that you're hoping to bank on developing more and then adding onto pieces this upcoming offseason. So that was the draft classes. I keep hearing he's a terrible drafter. He blows all his first picks. I agree his first picks are his weakest area, but the depth is crazy. The fact that there's only been 2 Pro Bowlers is not a fault of Brandon Beane. It's a fault of the Pro Bowl system. Pro Bowls are less of an achievement now than even like NBA All-Star teams are. Both are just major like popularity contests for their respective sports. And it's like, okay, cool. You didn't have popular players, but they're still good players. I don't want to hear this stupid stat about 2 Pro Bowlers over 8 drafts ever again. It's the worst. It's leaving out so much context without even ever looking at the draft. Like Spencer Brown isn't a Pro Bowler. Like that already invalidates it. Christian Benford isn't a Pro Bowler. Invalidates that stat. His 2 best picks are not Pro Bowlers. Oh well. Then okay, cool. Throw out that stupid Pro Bowl argument. Oh, I'm getting heated. The caffeine probably isn't helping. So let's talk about. I keep talking about the plan and why I think this was the right move for the Bills. Moving into year 3 of it, you're now having 0 dead cap next season and $35 million dead cap this season. I do want to shout out in a negative way the fucking dumbass Alex Brasky making the most fear-mongering article I have ever read, where it's just feeding into what people are already believing because they're upset and emotional after a Broncos loss. That same day, if not right the next one, he's putting out an article saying that the Bills are in cap hell and it's Brandon Beane's fault. Oh, why? Because they have $35 million in dead cap this offseason and they just lost. That's his whole argument, was that there was $35 million in dead cap this upcoming season. If anybody knows anything about dead cap is for is futures. You don't look at the dead cap you have this season because now you have $0 in dead cap moving forward to tap into. And if you don't understand that, and Brasky is banking on the fact that you don't know that, he's trying to just get clicks out of you and feed into the whole fear mongering of this. So no, Bills are not in cap hell. Even the past 2 seasons, I wouldn't even describe it as cap hell. Was it ideal situations to add in free agency? No, but you were still having enough room to manipulate the cap, sign your own guys, and now you have futures to pull from to continue to add from this season because you did it the correct way and didn't overly react to the success you had as a team. Now you can add to those pieces. Now you have a floor. Every other playoff loss we had previously, I came out of it thinking, okay, this is going to be a difficult offseason because we have X player needs a contract, Y player needs a contract, all these players that need to be signed, and we're running low on cap space because you can't sign everybody. Thank you. You have a ton of players right now that are under contract. Your core is established. You have core under contract. Greg Rousseau, Christian Benford, Josh Allen, James Cook, your tackle duo, Terrell Bernard, if you want to count him in there, Ed Oliver, a ton of players that are going to be young and still contributing to your team 3 to 5 years down the road. Under contract, you do not have to worry about them requiring upping in their pay, at least in this offseason. Now you have a ton of money that you don't have to devote to re-signing those guys. Let me go through. I went through last night and we listed all the players that are up for a contract. Bosa, I don't. If he wants to take like a low contract to come back again, sure. I don't know what the McDermott effect's going to be on that, but I do think that I'm not jumping over the hill and to throw him money at him to come back. Darius Slay, absolutely not. Daquan Jones, same thing as Bosa. If he's willing to take a lower cap hit, I will bring him back, especially as like a rotational player. Let some of these younger guys take over as the starters. Having Daquan Jones come back, he might be another McDermott type guy. We'll see what happens with him. But another player I'm not running to the podium to throw money at. Connor McGovern, I already said I don't think you should bring him back. I think there's enough depth on this offensive line, especially between Alec Anderson and Cedric Van Pran-Granger. With Alec Anderson being an RFA, I'll get to him in a second. But between those 2 guys, you should find a starter at center. If you don't also draft a guy. Larry Ogunjobi, see ya. Matt Milano, my favorite Buffalo Bill of all time, he can go. He's definitely lost a step. Injuries have taken a toll. I don't think he's a player that is capable of performing at a high enough level that even if you give him like a contract that's low enough, he'll come back. And the whole point of him restructuring his contract so that way he is done after this season, so he can hit the open market and try to find the most money possible with his last deal. I don't think you're expecting him to come back on a lower cap hit. I do think wherever McDermott goes, that's another player that's going to follow him there and get the bag from him to play for his defense, especially for like if it's a rebuilding team like the Browns or something. AJ Epinesa, that's a player I would bring back. Defensive end 3. I do think that he isn't going to demand too much money, and it's going to be another player that is a healthy body that can, what he can bring to your defense. I don't think you move on from AJ Epinesa, especially if it's not that outrageous of cap hit. Especially like I think it was like $6 million a year he signed to his last contract. If it's like 6.5, I think you do that. You do that move. David Edwards, see you. I think he was a great piece for us this year, but I think he's going to demand too much money, $20+ million on the free market, I'm assuming. And you have so much depth at the offensive line that you allow those guys to come up and take over for there. That's been the plan, is just to allow these guys to develop and then become the starters. So you don't have to pay your McGoverns and your Edwards. I do think you let those guys fight out for the starting roles. I think you'll find 2 good starters within your depth, and then you will draft some guys to replace those depth and keep that cycle going. Trey White, again, another guy that if he doesn't follow McDermott to wherever he goes, bringing him back on a cheaper contract, I think is worth it. Again, I don't think he's a guy that will fall anywhere other than where McDermott goes, especially with whoever they bring in as the coach, depending on if their scheme is more man reliant. Maybe that's a player you let go again. Trubisky, I'd be happy to bring him back. Reggie Gilliam, 100% want to bring him back. DeMar Hamlin, take it or leave it. I think he's going to be another McDermott type guy. Cam Lewis would bring him back depending on what the scheme is going to be with their coach. That's a more of a wait and see decision. Jordan Poyer, see ya. Prater, hopefully not. You don't have to bring him back. I'm sure he'll be retiring or something like that, so you don't have to worry about that. Shaq Thompson should be back as depth role. I don't know if he's going to be able to cash out on what he did for half a season for the Bills this year. So I don't think his cap hit's going to be too crazy, and he'll be at least good linebacker depth, if not your penciled-in starter, unless you draft somebody pretty high going into next season. And then Mitch Wishnowsky, I'd bring him back. Was a really good punter for us at the end of the season. Another player where you're looking to sign him back. But like, look at the names I said I would bring back: Epinesa, Trubisky, Gilliam, Cam Lewis, Shaq Thompson, Mitch Wishnowsky. And then the RFAs, Ryan Vandermark and Alec Anderson. If Vandermark doesn't demand too much, then sure. If not, see ya. Alec Anderson, I'm doing everything I can to bring him back. I do think those are all the players I would re-sign. That's not going to break the bank at all. And you have, like I've been saying, all this dead cap free now, all this cap space in general. Once you do your restructures free, you're going to have ability to add players from the outside of the organization to free agency. And so, I mean, why McDermott now? Why McDermott now instead of Beane? For me, I was always in the McDermott stay around camp. I was always looking for him to be the player or the coach that stays around when everyone wanted him gone after the Bengals loss, after all the Chiefs losses. Everyone was like, fire McDermott, fire McDermott, fire McDermott, until this year where they flipped and reversed it. I do think that in the past, because I was afraid of the talent that was leaving the team, right? McDermott is a floor-raising type coach. He gets the most out of the least. You bring in 6th-round picks, they can replace guys who were first-round picks or highly touted players who went and got big money on free agency. If you are a team like the Bills were in the past, where you're losing players, can't pay everybody, and you're hoping for guys to bounce back and have a floor so you're not losing that level of competitiveness, having McDermott as your coach is the guy to go with there. I never understood why people wanted to move off them in the past when you were in the process of losing talent over and over again. However, I'm now seeing this roster as a team that has that established core. They have the floor established through the players they have on the roster. You now are able to raise the ceiling, go out and get you a ceiling-raising coach. I love McDermott. I wish they both would have stayed. But I do think that because of the power struggle that was happening between Beane and McDermott, I'm assuming over this plan that Beane sold Pagula on, one of them was going to have to go. And if it was going to be one of the other, it had to have been McDermott this year. We don't need another floor. We still don't need the floor raiser now. Like, it would have been nice to have, but if one of them has to go, he's gone. And now you have the opportunity to bring a new coach in with an established core. That coach is going to want to sign off on will only take the job if he likes the established core, a majority of the established core. And now you're giving him a ton of resources to add his players on top of that established core already. You get Josh Allen, and you get a crap ton of resources to add to this roster because of how much you have available in dead cap for the next few seasons and cap space this year and 7 draft picks. So you bring in, I'm a big fan of Udinski from the Jags, Davis Webb from the Denver Broncos, or Clint Kubiak from the Seahawks. Those are my three big favorites right now for the head coaching job. And that's why I'm in defending a Brandon Beane staying and McDermott going, is if one of them had to go, you're allowing Brandon Beane to see out the part of the plan that he said this is going to be where we turn it around and build the roster up to the point where we're going to be competing for a Super Bowl and have that talent that everyone's craving for. He didn't rush to try to artificially inflate the first 2 years. He said he stayed patient, he waited, and now this is the year where it's going to flourish. And this is how I know I'm going to know whether or not I'm still a Brandon Beane fan by the start of this upcoming season. If he does some stupid shit in free agency, the draft, March 1st with the trades, when the league year starts again, if he does anything that like I immediately am like, oh, that's a bad move, or that doesn't do anything, I'm going to start to turn on him very quickly, especially when the draft goes around. I already have about 200 players watched for this draft class, and I'm not even close to being done. I'm going to know exactly how I feel about this draft class. If it's like last year's draft class, I will be encouraged. If the free agency goes the way I hope it goes, I will be encouraged. But he's walking on thin ice for me. But you have to at least let him see it through, because he's been patient to this point, and it's gone the exact way he said it's going to go. So is this new coach going to come in, and Brandon Beane's going to put a lot of this guy put his stamp on the roster with some big splashy moves in free agency and allowing them to go out there and make a good draft class? Hopefully. That's where the most hope is going to be for this team. If you brought McDermott back and fired Beane, I wouldn't. You bring a new GM in. I don't even know what that GM search is going to look like. You're also stunting what you can do with scouts and things like that at that point. And who knows if that guy's going to know the vision for this plan that Beane has had this entire time. So I'm putting a lot of faith in Beane's plan, and we're going to find out if that works out almost immediately as soon as the Super Bowl is over. So that is my Brandon Beane rant. He has stayed to his word, stuck true to it. We've overachieved. So, like, I understand why people are upset that I didn't go all the way, because you want to win it every year, obviously. But looking at it from top down, removing yourself from the fan goggles, he has done what he said he was going to do. He said we're not going to be as talented, but we're ramping up to become the most talented team in 2026, 2027, because we're going to have resources. We're going to take our lumps and be able to add a bunch of players this upcoming offseason. We're going to let young guys get playing time and develop. We've seen that with Cole Bishop. Hopefully, Keon can take a step. Hopefully, like Jackson Hawes can take a step. You've seen that you're going to see that now. Hopefully, with the interior offensive line players that are come in and start. But that is where I'm at, and why I'm so willing to defend Brandon Beane right now, and why I'm confused as to why others are so adamant anti-Brandon Beane, bring back McDermott, when last year it was fire McDermott across the board. I just see it completely opposite. So that's my rant. That's probably where the YouTube video is going to end. I'll have to cut it up and make it a bit more fluid, so it's not 52 minutes long. But that is how I view the current Bills situation, and why I think the take of Brandon Beane needs to be fired, how the hell did he survive, this is the worst thing ever, is over-exaggerated. And people just playing on their emotions and the fact that our season just ended. Same thing that happened when people were calling for McDermott's head back in 2021 after the loss to the Bengals. I think it's the same ebbs and flows of that. So I do want to say, now that we're off of that big rant, I've heard some people talk about like, oh, we should trade Josh Allen, get picks back for him, or, oh, Josh Allen's not going to be playing here, we should just trade him. That's an unserious opinion. If you have that opinion that Josh Allen is going to be, you should have Josh Allen not playing for your football team, or Josh Allen is the problem at all with this football team, whether it's because he can't get it done in the playoffs, somehow that's your opinion, or that he's just not the guy and you have to move on. That's an unserious opinion. I don't have to take your football opinion serious if that's what you truly believe. And if you don't know why, then that's also the problem. So I don't come at me with any Josh Allen is the problem takes. That is just blatantly untrue. Another thing I wanted to discuss was, I forget what it was. I just had it in my brain now. I'm blanking. But anyway, I do think that what could be fun is going through and watching some of the stuff that people are saying when it comes to their takes on Josh Allen or on the Bill situation, which I just ranted about. Or we'll do some film breakdown. I'm not sure yet. But that was the purpose of this. I've had this rant like 4 times in the past 2 days about how even before McDermott got fired, I was arguing why Beane wasn't the problem to my buddies. And now it's McDermott's fired. Why the hell is Beane still around? And it's the same argument to this point. So that I've had this exact like rant to people like 4 or 5 different times, and I wanted to get it on film so I can be out there. I can gather comments and hear other people's opinions. Which if you are watching, we got 21 people right now, 20 on the Twitter. If you have opinions about it, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I'm willing to go back and forth and debate people right now. I do think I have an open mind as to it being other ways. Like I said, I'm not a Brandon Beane like bootlicker. I don't agree with a lot of the free agency stuff we did. We went through all those free agency classes. We went through the draft classes, and there was definitely picks I'm anti-Beane on, or that he clearly and obviously whiffed. So I'm not saying that he's unfallible. So my mind is open to being changed even a little bit towards that way. It's just like I think you have to wait and see to have a definitive opinion on Brandon Beane, and everyone just blatantly calling for his head. Here we'll do a bit of reaction stuff just because I want to. This is what got me fired up. I woke up this morning and I had to go shovel and stuff. By the time I got ready to come do this, didn't really have the fire in me to come on and do a 55-minute rant. But I grabbed my 200 milligrams of caffeine, and I watched some videos online about people having the opposite opinion, bashing Brandon Beane, stuff like that. And it got me going with why I want to have this discussion, and it got me fired up to come back and do this again. So there is one I want to watch. This is the one I watched previously, and this is from a content creator I actually really like. And it does just make like meme videos where it's like, okay, it's the videos where you just make fun of teams for doing dumb shit, and it's kind of like the epitome of the consensus opinion. Let's see here. If Lawrence didn't throw a pick to end the Jags game, everyone would want McDermott fired for clock management, but instead we only had to wait one more week, and everyone's freaking out a little. I mean, when it comes to this playoff run, I agree. I love McDermott. Let me get that clear. I love Sean McDermott. I've been one of his most adamant defenders up until this season. And even then, like I said, I would have brought him back. If both could have coexisted, I would have brought both of them back. But if you were going to make the decision, I thought McDermott had to be the one to go too. And I think he did a phenomenal job covering for so many injuries. You had Darnell Savage. Think about, we did it with the D tackles, and I think the edges a little bit, but mostly D tackles and the corners, where we had corner 5 and Dane Jackson in the playoffs. And talking about the D tackle depth, where your planned D tackle starters coming into the season was Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones. Ed Oliver's out after week 4. Dwayne Carter is your first and primary backup out from the preseason. And then you have 2 rookies and Larry Ogunjobi, who you didn't realize was going to be suspended. Like, remember the conversations we were having before roster cutdown day, where it was, wow, you have Oliver, Jones, Dwayne Carter, TJ Sanders, Deion Walker, and Larry Ogunjobi. How are you going to fit all these? When Larry Ogunjobi comes off suspension, who goes? Who stays? Like, wow, we're so deep. And then Dwayne Carter's out, Ed Oliver's out. You have Jones, 2 rookies, and whoever you can find on the practice squad. And then TJ Sanders ends up not playing D tackle because he has to play D end. Like that was something that McDermott overcame really well. And I really do think that was a masterclass of coaching on the defensive side there. But that's the same thing where it's like, well, why didn't Brandon Beane build a deeper D tackle room? Look, he did. You just had 2 major injuries and a surprise suspension. And then same with the corner room. Like, you're coming in, the corner room was supposed to be a number 1 of Christian Benford, a number 2, like a 2.5 for both Harrison and Trey White, with eventually Harrison taking over as a 2. White at 3, Dorian Strong at 4, Jamarcus Ingram at 5, which you were hoping to turn a Jamarcus Ingram to a Darius Slay, especially with Harrison being hurt. That didn't end up working out. But you had enough depth, and then you end up having to go with Dane Jackson, who in that theoretical world was your CB6. Safety, look at safety. Who were your starting safeties supposed to be? It was supposed to be Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop, with DeMar Hamlin as your primary backup. You brought in Derek Forrest. He didn't really stick around. That was fine because you still had Cam Lewis. And then you have Rapp go out with an injury. Jordan Poyer comes in, plays kind of admirably. Jordan Poyer goes out with an injury. DeMar Hamlin was out this whole season with an injury. So now you're on to CB or safety 4 to start the game with Cam Lewis, opposite Cole Bishop. And then he gets a cramp at the end of the half. Then you're on safety 5. Darnell Savage is your 5th safety down the depth chart. Nobody has 5 good safeties on a roster. And that's even counting Jordan Hancock. Maybe Savage was safety 6. Like, that's insane amounts of depletion in that secondary. So, like, yeah, they gave up 2 touchdowns because their depth wasn't good enough. But, like, find me a team that has a good corner 5 and a good safety 6 and a good D tackle 7. I do think that McDermott did a phenomenal job recovering and covering up for those injuries, which is I'm responding to this comment. I think McDermott did a phenomenal job. But, yes, I think I don't understand the flip, really, because every year was always fire McDermott, fire McDermott, fire McDermott. This year, it was fire Brady the entire season, which is another opinion I have, which I wasn't super low on Brady. But it was fire Brady the whole season, and then as soon as they lost, it was fire Beane. McDermott's awesome. Like, where were all these fire McDermott people? How did they all flip immediately? I don't understand what changed, other than he had to cover for a bunch of injuries. And people were still flaming him during the season for his run defense. I don't know. That's for me. I do think that even if they did lose in the Jags game without getting that pick, it still would have been fire Beane, because I think McDermott ingratiated himself throughout this season. But I don't understand why that happened when everyone was so vitriolically fire McDermott in years past. So I understand the comment. I just don't think that, and I would hope that would have been the case. But I don't understand what changed from last week to this week with just that one win. I think what played a bigger role in it being fire Beane over fire McDermott was the field you were playing against was so weak. You felt like this is the year. That's what the whole public media was telling you. No Mahomes, no Lamar, no Burrow. Even though that whole thought process of it being the quarterbacks matchups you had to worry about as opposed to like the best defenses or whatever, because you have Josh Allen on the other side. That was the whole consensus like narrative coming into these playoffs, and it's like, okay, cool. So everyone thought that this had to be the year. This had to be the year. When in the scheme of the 3-year turnaround that Beane had pitched, this didn't have to be the year. Next year is the year. It was just that people got excited because he made the AFC Championship game last year, and then the field was weak this year. Is why I think that people had higher expectations. And then when you have higher expectations and you can't really blame the coach because there were so many injuries, you got to blame somebody. Someone has to be the scapegoat, and it was Brandon Beane for the fans. Ends up being Sean McDermott for the organization. And I do think the only reason why that Sean got fired was because him and Beane didn't see eye to eye, and Beane wanted more power within the organization. I do think that if that didn't happen, McDermott would still be here. I'm a little worried about the locker room's morality, because you have all these guys who've been playing for 8 straight years of football in their career, and some of them, the only professional coach they've ever known is Sean McDermott. Are those guys going to want to jump ship to wherever he goes and coaches? Is it going to be like college football now, where a head coach recruits a ton of players to their program, and as soon as he gets fired or goes and takes a different job, they all want to transfer and follow him to that new place? The Curt Cignetti of it all. Shout out to the Indiana Hoosiers who won last night. Didn't watch a second of that game. I was too distracted everywhere else. But Curt Cignetti leaves James Madison. Every single one of the top players that followed him, besides Mendoza, was from like Elijah Surratt, Mikhail Kamara. All guys are from James Madison, came with Cignetti. So I'm curious to see how many Buffalo Bills are playing for whatever team Sean McDermott is coaching for next season. That'd be curious for me to see. And that's what I was trying to talk about with the guys who are expiring contracts this year, that they are currently going to be leaving. Are they going to want to re-sign for cheaper, or are they going to just follow McDermott to wherever he goes to, coaching wise? So that'll be curious. But all right, let me try to get this video working so I can do a quick little reaction for you guys. I've already watched this video like twice, but I don't really remember his exact points, so I do want to see how this works. So this is Ben from Brand. I'm a big fan of him, and the fact that he does this stuff to like be like it's like a comedy thing where like he's he roasts teams and stuff for like what.
Hey, is it normal to feel like there's 27 guys on defense when you're playing the Texans?
Sean, you're fired.
It's he does a bunch of comedy stuff, and this is one of the comedy videos he has. Covering the Bills situation. I kind of want to just react to it. I know it's supposed to be like funny and everything, but I'm still gonna, because this is my whole stream is to defend Brandon Beane, and this is the whole crux of this video. I do want to have a bit of a reaction to it. So I hopefully the audio is coming through. If you guys are watching this and you can't hear the audio from the video we're watching, just let me know in the comments. I'll try to get to figure it out. Okay, it says screen audio should be working.
Yeah, I expected that. And Brandon, there is no other way to say this. You are terrible at your job.
Yeah.
So, real quick, again, I'm not in agreement that he's terrible at his job. Like, that is the common consensus right now, and that is what he's playing off of like, Beane is like this terrible GM of like, hasn't made any great moves, etc. I disagree with that, especially with the draft class thing, but I do think that he hasn't been great. So I can see that. I can see that point a little bit.
Yeah. We still haven't gotten to a Super Bowl despite having one of the best quarterbacks in the league.
Only one team ever makes the Super Bowl, and you ran into a dynasty. And I mean, yes, you should have made it at least once at this point. And I do think that's another stat I've seen a lot with McDermott is like the coaches and quarterbacks have to make it within their first 7 years. They don't make it ever at all. So maybe another reason why he maybe wanted to move on from McDermott, which I guess this video is agreeing with. I just think that only one team makes it, and yes, they had a good enough rosters. Brandon Beane had built good enough rosters to make it previously. It was just this past 2 seasons that are colorizing a lot of what people think about Brandon Beane.
Nope. You've only drafted 2 Pro Bowlers in the 8 years that we've had Josh Allen.
Went through that. Those 2 Pro Bowlers, James Cook, and I forget the other one was. I said it earlier. Shit, I can't remember. I think he's 2018 pick. It was James Cook and somebody else, but it wasn't Christian Benford and it wasn't Spencer Brown, and that's already invalidating to that point. Like, why, if you're gonna make that claim that he's only drafted 2 Pro Bowlers, but 2 of his best draft picks weren't Pro Bowlers, like that doesn't make any sense. That means it just proves that it's a popularity contest. Oh no, the Bills didn't win a popularity contest. Who could have guessed that?
Yep. And you insist on trotting out the grossest receivers imaginable every year and just begging Josh to bail you out. What are you trying to say about Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Elijah Moore, Curtis Samuel, Mecole Hardman, Chase Claypool, Laviska Shenault, Quintez Cephas, KJ Hamler, and Josh Palmer, huh?
Oh, it's Josh Palmer, not Justin Palmer. I was mistaken in the video earlier. Most of those guys didn't even make the final 53. Like those are names that got brought in, yes, and were moves he made. I don't think they were great moves, but even like I brought it up with Josh Palmer signing. Who did you want him to bring in? Who was the guy out there that got signed that you're mad in hindsight they didn't bring in instead of Josh Palmer? Like the top 3 guys in free agency last year, Diggs, Kupp, and Adams, all were outpriced. They're out of your price range. They were 22 million, and 18 million. So Josh Palmer, I wouldn't argue with this. Again, also lost the whole season to injury. All these other guys, though, like the Mecole Hardmans, the Elijah Moores, mid-season pickups because you were struggling in offense or at wide receiver, either from injury or because you lacked talent. Sure. Curtis Samuel, never really agreed with that thought process. I'll take that one on the chin. But like he brought in Gabe Davis. He was the one who made the move to bring in Stefon Diggs. Like he brought in good wide receivers. It just hasn't been recently. So I guess that is a valid criticism of recent, and that is something I'm going to be hyper aware of moving forward for the next couple months when it comes to the draft of free agency. Like you need to prioritize bringing wide receivers. You can't go lose your shit on WGR of people criticizing you for not bringing receivers, not bringing any receivers in, and it's still being a problem. And then also just run it back and do the same thing next year. I do think that is a very valid criticism.
Not that they stink. Oh yeah. You know what we have to do. Hear me out. What if instead of firing me, you promote me? Why would we promote you if you're bad at your job? Because then I'd have a different job. And what if I'm good at that one?
So that was something I didn't cover in the rant earlier. Brandon Beane got in a promotion. He's now president of football operations. That entails that he is going to be the one making decisions across the organization, including coaches. Like before, there was kind of 50-50, Beane McDermott. McDermott picked all his assistant coaches. Now, Beane's not only going to be hiring the head coach, but he's going to be directly involved in hiring all the assistant coaches as well, in addition to the head coach he brings in. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I think that it makes it be like, okay, Brandon, you wanted to be the one that has all the power, have all the power. Now you know your ass is on the hot seat. And that's why I named out Udinski and and Davis Webb, and Clint Kubiak as guys that I would want as my next head coaches because they have connections with other organizations and good defensive assistants in their past. Like Udinski working with the Jags has experience working with the Bucs organization and the Jags organization, can pull assistants from there, and that Jags defense they just kicked our ass. They were so physical. I loved it in that playoff game. That's a guy that if he has any connections with some assistants that aren't the defensive coordinators of like the Jaguars right now, I do think that he could bring some guys over and still be a good offensive minded head coach for Josh Allen and that offense that the Jags really took a giant step with this year. When it comes to Davis Webb, former Buffalo Bills quarterback, good friends with Josh Allen, I think that's going to be a big impact. Is if Josh Allen wants him to be the head coach, and Davis Webb is like consistently considered as one of the smartest minds in football right now, and he's the passing game coordinator for the Broncos. Bills offered him the QB coach position. He said, "Nah, I want to play one more year of football." Was the third stringer on the Giants for a season, and then became passing game coordinator this past season for the Broncos. I think he'd be a guy buddy with Josh Allen. Super hyper intelligent mind. I think I'd rather have him as an offensive coordinator than a head coach. But the only way you can get him is by asking him to be your head coach. Do that, and he has connections with. He's played so recently. He has connections with the previous Giants squad, which I don't think he would want to tap into that for defensive coaches. But like the current Broncos defensive coaching staff could definitely tap into that with his connections. On top of whoever Beane knows, and then also finally with Kubiak. I mean, Kubiak is perfect because he's the engineer of one of the best new offenses in Seattle, and he's very well connected with the defense meta that's going to be exploding. The Mike Macdonald defense. He has a bunch of Mike Macdonald disciples to go after. They can bring out to the Bills. And I forgot to mention with Udinski, he was a longtime Vikings assistant. Has connections with Brian Flores disciples or Brian Flores in general. And worked under Kevin O'Connell as an offensive assistant. So you're bringing in like a Ken O'Connell disciple who has connections to Brian Flores disciples. That could be a good 1-2 punch to bring into your field. So him getting the promotion, like yes, this is played for laughs, but I do think that it's not my favorite move they've made, but it's kind of just I think it was symbolic of, okay, Brandon, you do it. Go and do it. And if you fuck it up, then it's on you. But for right now, I think this was the move to kind of put all the onus on him. I do hope, though, he finds one of those three guys because they have pretty good connections to help him out with selecting his assistants.
This guy's a genius. Consider yourself promoted and hire whoever you want as head coach. It's going to be Daboll. I know. Sean.
All right, that is one I'm hyper aware that Daboll could be the pick. Like I said, I think it's going to have to be someone that Josh signs off on, and him and Dabes were tight. And Daboll was never going to come back to the Bills while McDermott was here. They hated each other. So if the coaching decision is Daboll as a head coach, not just coming back as an OC, if he comes back as the head coach, I think you really got to lean on Brandon Beane bringing in the assistants because I don't know who the hell Daboll has worked with that I would be jumping for joy for them to bring in between his Giants tenure and his past with the Patriots or his past with former Bills. Maybe the former Bills assistants he worked with, he could bring back and kind of run the coaching staff back, but with a different mindset, offensively minded. I don't hate Daboll as a coach, but I do think that looking at him to be the guy who comes in and resets the organization and has assistants to come in and can balance him out on defense, especially, that was the major problem for the Giants on top of not having really a quarterback. So I think Daboll is definitely not my favorite pick. Like I said, those three guys I think are my favorite. Daboll I'd be fine with, I guess, if you could find the right assistants. But outside of those four, I'm pretty much going to be upset regardless of who else they hire if it's not one of those four guys. So those are my four main candidates, including Daboll, I guess. But I wouldn't be jumping for joy for them. All right, let's find another video to react to. I think we're going to go with more of the first take type of videos. Could also do WGR. They recently reacted to it, and I haven't seen it yet. Oh boy, do I want to watch Dave Portnoy and John Gruden? That sounds like something I'd rather never watch, ever. Fucking Bill Belichick. Absolutely not.
betting on DraftKings or FanDuel.
It's starting in Miami. Miami Dolphins have a new head coach. His name is Jeff Hafley. He has spent the last 2 years as the defense coach. Be there to hire former Jets head announcement that came during our show. Shefty broke the news during our show yesterday, and so we reacted to that. News that came not long thereafter when the Bills announced it was that they have elevated their general manager, Brandon Beane, who now is basically in total control of everything and will hire the coach and gained power, basically got a promotion out of all of this. And I personally found that puzzling because I thought there were a lot of mistakes made on that side of it there. But that surprised me. So one way or another reaction.
I'm curious what his lot of mistakes are because we've gone over it. We went in depth on it. Like what was the lot of mistakes he made? I don't think he's made a perfect roster. But like I said, I don't think it was more deliberate of a lack of talent this year than it was leading up because of that plan, that 3-year plan they had for the retool. I don't think that, and I think they made the wide receivers definitely was a mistake. We want to argue linebacker could have been one of his mistakes, but I think overall the roster was not this mistake-ridden team that would make that's the wrong one. There we go. Nope, still wrong. Where was I? This one. I think those are the only two real mistakes you could say were made by Beane coming into this season specifically. Like everything else we talked about when it comes to injuries or just players, young players not being ready to take on as heavy of a role, that's not really going to be a mistake in my eyes.
McDermott being out, reaction to the way they've now restructured and how it goes from here.
Shocked by both, in all honesty. I didn't think that either one, I didn't think that McDermott would be fired, and I definitely didn't think Beane would be elevated through this firing. And so when you look at McDermott, I understand the frustration, right? You don't get a Super Bowl, you have Josh Allen, so there can always be arguments made about playoff wins and losses and what they're capable of doing. We saw what happened with Tomlin stepping down. We saw Harbaugh, right? These owners are getting frustrated that they're not going to that tipping point of the Super Bowl. But the part for me, everybody talked about this is Josh Allen's, it's his best chance. What is best team? Like they did not have the team. They didn't have the receivers. And if you look at like Beane's track record, I'm not sure why all of a sudden he gets elevated. I think he's drafted 2 Pro Bowlers.
Since Allen.
There's the Pro Bowler talking point again. I think that is the easiest stat that it's going to be a dunking point for a lot of these shows. I'm sure that's going to get brought up in every single clip we watch. I'm not sure why he got promoted because up to this point, he's never even drafted more than 2 Pro Bowlers. Like, again, it's a popularity contest. If you ignore the fact that Christian Benford and Spencer Brown, Khalil Shakir, a lot of these other guys that are good starters didn't make the Pro Bowl. Like, that is your argument, right? Is that, okay, James Cook and whoever else it was made the Pro Bowl and nobody else did, but like, okay, sure. That's just them failing to put Spencer Brown and Christian Benford in the right pedestal. And yes, there was a lack of talent on this year's roster. This year wasn't supposed to be the year to make the Super Bowl. It was consensus believed after every game. Everyone came in and was like, oh, this isn't our year, man. We're just not as good as we have been in the past. But as soon as you make the playoffs and you win one playoff game, the expectations get higher. And now everyone's like, well, we should have won the Super Bowl this year. What the hell? Did you see the field? It was just the top 3 defenses in the AFC they had to go through. If the Texans ended up winning that game, even then, like the Patriots aren't slackers. Like the people saw the narratives around the field being weak because there wasn't the big names that the NFL has previously had in the playoffs, and it would turn the entire fan base from wow, this team. It's probably we understood that this was going to be kind of a retool year or retool pair of years to why the hell didn't we make it? Brandon Beane sucks. We've not been good for the past 2 years. Like that was the plan. That was always the plan. And the Pro Bowl stat, I'm just over debating.
Allen. Okay, so this guy, and I said it before, Josh Allen's got to be Superman pretty much week in and week out for this team to win. Unfortunately, he didn't play well, but for Beane's elevation, that was the most shocking part for me.
When you have a player like Josh Allen, it's going to raise the expectations of everyone around you. So I think while I'm a little bit surprised they made this move, I understand they make a move. The shocking thing, I think your point is about the Brandon Beane being elevated, and it's a story as old as the NFL, is the general managers tend to have a better relationship with ownership. When there's a disappointment or a series of disappointments, someone has to pay. Normally, the general manager is there talking to the owner more often than the coach, and that decision made. We saw Liam Cohen last year wouldn't take the Jags job unless there were changes made at that spot. You see, every time we have this come around, owner or coaches are very concerned about the ownership structure and who's going to be in the front office.
And that's why it took John Harbaugh so long to get his deal done with the Giants until he made sure that he was dealing directly with ownership and not with the level in between with Joe Shane, who remains but obviously isn't in charge of him. So does the elevation of Brandon Beane, in your mind, make the Bills coaching job, look, on its face, you have a chance to coach Josh Allen? That's the best job that could possibly come open in the NFL. But does this...
I see what they're saying, that the idea that Beane being promoted and that he's clearly got a good relationship with Terry to the point where he's able to influence that and get that promotion, and that McDermott was gone and Beane stayed. Like the fact that he clearly has a good relationship with Terry, and his coaches are going to want to know that they have a direct line of communication to the owner, and they're not working through a GM that if that GM sours on them, they're gone. I understand that point. It's a good point. It's how it is with everybody. If you want job security, you're going to want to be able to talk to the people who are deciding that, not some layman. I do think that the job is going to still be desirable. It's the number one job to go to, regardless of whether or not Brandon Beane is still there or not, because you have Josh Allen, you have, like we talked about leading up to this, a ton of capital to then bring your own guys in. And if Beane is vouching for you and bringing you in because he wants to hire you as a coach, you would assume that, and I'm sure the interview process would clear this up too, you would assume that you're going to be allowed to put your imprint on this roster. It's not going to be solely Brandon Beane making that decision. So I do think that while their point is decent for why it would be kind of let's hold up and let's learn some more about how this organization works, especially with this recent promotion, I don't think it's going to impact how the Bills coaching search goes, super significantly.
Make it less appealing.
I think it does. And I think in the sense of, you wonder when they move on from Sean McDermott, do you already have an idea of who you want to be next? Joe Brady's the offensive coordinator there. He's already been talked about as a head coach in NFL circles, has done interviews. So when you look at this and you say, all right, Brandon Beane's going to be elevated, you know he already has that relationship with Joe Brady. And I think on top of that, we're talking about this situation because of how good Josh Allen is. The fact that he's been with that offensive coordinator, they've had success as well. It almost makes sense to not allow Joe Brady to leave your building. You think about Liam Cohen with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was our offensive coordinator.
All right. Joe Brady, I know I said I'd be fine with those four, and that was it, and I'd be upset. Joe Brady may be a fifth name I'd be fine with because I have liked Joe Brady. I've been one of the guys defending Joe Brady this season. I know that some of his play calling can get monotonous and people don't like it, and especially when it doesn't work, it looks way bad, way worse than some of the other play calls. Like if you miss a deep shot, it's like, oh, at least I took a shot. But if you miss on the screen or you're on a screen and it doesn't work, it's like, oh, fuck. When a screen does work, everyone's like, oh, my God, it's amazing. They may have utilized that a bit too much. They probably need to expand that playbook a bit more, which they did as they got ramped up into the playoffs. I will say that. When big games called for it, their playbook expanded, and they had a great idea of how to run their offense in those pivotal moments. So if Joe Brady was the hire, especially because I just like the defensive structure the Bills have with their 4-2-5, I would be fine with Brady being the hire and then adding some more accessory coaches so you're not having a total turnover of your roster and your coaching staff with McDermott gone. You just want a more offensive focused mindset in there with less turnover than you typically want. So that way all the guys that are currently under contract aren't total mismatches for whoever's coming in. I'd be fine with Joe Brady as well. I think those are the 5 candidates. I'm like, there's 2 of them, Dable and Brady, that if I heard, I'd be like, all right, I'm not totally sold, but we'll see. I'm fine. We'll see where this goes. And then the other 3, I think I'd be over the moon for that specifically. I think Udinski is still my favorite just because he comes from that Vikings background, then to the Jags with Liam Cohen, like they're talking about here, and that defense that the Jags had, and the Brian Flores defense. I think he's my favorite because of that. Davis Webb is he number? He might be number 2 just because he's buddy with Josh Allen, and he's like that. If you want to get that Sean McVay type big swing at a young offensive coach, Davis Webb is that guy. So that's probably why he's my number 2. And then Kubiak is just he's the coveted one. Everyone wants Clint Kubiak. He has ties with the Seahawks defense, which has been the way defense is going to be played moving forward because that's the new top tier level of defense. It was the McDermott style when he first got brought on, the Fangio style. Now it's the McDonald style. So 2 and 3 are pretty close, but I think Udinski is clearly my number 1.
He leaves to go to Jacksonville. Tampa Bay not having success. There was conversations about Todd Bowles. For Buffalo now, you move on from McDermott. Do you do that in order to elevate Joe Brady with the belief that he can win? You're only looking for 2 more wins from what Sean McDermott was doing.
What do we get a sense is going to be the deal there? I think they're going to gather today and go put together their list of candidates and start issuing the interview request. There's obviously a process and rules that have to be followed. You can't just elevate Joe Brady. So this will take a little bit of time. They're behind the 8 ball a little bit. Let's say they want to hire Vance Joseph from the Broncos or Davis Webb on Broncos staff. They can't talk to either one of those guys till next week. And that's only if the Broncos lose Sunday. If the Broncos were to win, then you can't talk to anybody on their team until after the Super Bowl. So the Buffalo Bills getting on this a couple weeks into the cycle does put them behind the 8 ball a little bit, unless the answer is going to be someone from their staff or someone from outside the organization.
That's kind of a problem I have with the interview process as a whole, is the fact that teams, I guess you're encouraging teams that suck and fire their coaches early can now have an advantage of getting the hiring process going sooner. I don't think it's gonna be a big deal, especially because of how highly coveted the Bills' job is. Guys are gonna hold out to see if they can get that job. I don't think that's a very like good criticism of this, specifically because of what that job is with the Bills. And like I said, I do think Brady is a decent fallback plan if all your candidates that you did want to interview end up taking jobs other places, or you feel like you're behind the 8 ball a bit. I do think that you have a lot of versatility with how you can handle this coaching hiring.
Difference for me in the NFL and college is like, hey, why are we hurrying? Like, we don't got to go recruit. Like, you know your team, right? Like, there's free agents that you know are going to come up. There's no, if you're an NFL team and Sean McDermott just came available, like, to hurry around and go sign guys and put coaches in places, like, take your time, take a breath.
Especially if you're keeping the front office intact, because if they're going to be making these decisions either way, you would want a coach whose mindset or whose thought process you could pick from.
Right.
But it seems like Sean McDermott is going to be the decision maker. And with that extra power becomes, I think, the extra level of accountability. I don't think the next firing, if there is one, is going to be the coach. They're going to say, we've given you the leeway to go through a couple of coaches, and now it's on you.
And then the name Bill Belichick came up here yesterday from Rex Ryan, who has been telling me, I can tell you right now, privately, he has been talking about that for years. He thinks they are enamored of Bill Belichick in Buffalo.
Well, he certainly would know. Like, he worked there, obviously, and with this ownership group. I would find it surprising because of what's going on with Belichick the last couple of years. I mean, the last
2 things. So I heard from somebody else, I won't say who it is, but their opinion was that with Brandon Beane taking the level of power he did in the organization with that promotion, that there is no way he's going to hire a coach that's going to demand power over personnel. Like Belichick, when he was with the Patriots, was the GM too. And regardless, and I'll get into how I feel about him as a coach option in general, but like the idea that Beane would fight for power against McDermott and then turn around and hire a guy that's going to want even more power is ludicrous. I don't think that should be. That wouldn't be. Why would he do that? It doesn't make any sense. I'm trying to think of a way to rationalize it, but it wouldn't make any sense for him to want to do that. In general, though, I think Bill's over the hill. He's like a great defensive mind. If you're going to bring Bill in, the defensive style he plays is you would have to revamp your entire defensive personnel to fit that scheme. Like, you don't have the guys on your current defense that can play his scheme. And that's similar with a lot of these 3-4 multiple defenses. That's why I think Mike McDonald, the Jags defense, that all fits and that all works for what you currently have on the roster. You don't have to make as many tweaks, but like a team like a guy like Bill Belichick is just, I don't see him being able to keep up. And you hire him in 2 or 3 years, he retires. Like, you have to do this all over again. And I just don't love his track record of, well, first off, the control he's going to demand, his track record of bringing in offensive minds that aren't Josh McDaniels, and the idea that the defense would have to have a facelift to be able to fit what he wants. And in the offense, to some extent, how well is James Cook going to be in a Bill Belichick offense? Like, I just miss me with that entire thought process.
3 NFL coach hiring cycles, he's interviewed with one team that didn't hire him, has since hired another coach and didn't interview him this time around. I think the bloom is off there a little bit, but it only takes one infatuated owner, so I guess we'll see.
Magic Man, a Monday full of major coaching news.
So that was the one from Get Up. We'll look for another one. I think that there's been a lot. Like, you can't miss it. I kind of want to watch the instant reaction from the WGR guys because I have it saved into my watch later list on my personal YouTube. And I'm curious to see because they were on, I think they were live when it happened. It was an instant reaction. I was at work. And I'm pretty sure Jeremy and Joe were live when it happened. And I want to check out their instant reactions to it. Oh, great. There's titles that the Bills fire the wrong guy. Oh, that's Shook and Bulldog. I think with GR, for the Bills fans, local Bills fans, Jeremy and Joe are definitely the cream of the crop for their programming. Shook and Bulldog, I think, have definitely lost a step, personally. I'm not over enthusiastic with that. Where is the episode I'm looking for? There it is. Okay. So yeah, they were on live when this happened. So we'll get their initial gut reactions to it. Do our one. Let's do 1.25 because they probably talk a little bit faster.
something. Tom Pelissero of NFL Network. The Bills have fired Sean McDermott. Sources tell the insiders.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, and there's an edited post. See the latest post? Yeah, it's the same thing.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
It happened.
Wow.
The Bills have fired Sean McDermott.
Wow. All right.
Wow. Ian Rappaport. The Bills have moved on from Sean McDermott.
Wow.
It's got a chill up my spine. This is crazy.
Wow.
I'm in shock.
I'm also in shock. I mean, listen.
They fired McDermott.
Yeah. They fired Sean McDermott.
Genuinely, this is the exact same reaction I had, where I was at work and I got the notification. I just kind of stopped everything I was doing to be like, holy shit. Like, that was like, I think I verbally out loud commented that, and like people were like, why, what happened? And I was like, they just fired McDermott. That's insane. It was like an absolute like shock wave. I didn't think it was going to happen. So them reacting this way is kind of funny.
I can't believe it.
The margin was so thin that pass gets called as an interception and he's fired. That's incredible to me. Yeah.
I don't think the interception played into it as much because like you had a defensive drive after that to stop them. Like you could have, there was time to stop them after that. Like, yes, that would have been the killer. I didn't see it until his knee was moving that the ball was not in his possession, because like the whole rule is that like the ball was not in his possession as he was coming to the ground because the guy's hand was in it and it was moving, so he didn't have full possession. That's why it was neither person's ball, and then whoever comes away with it has the catch, which is why it was an interception. I think by the rule of the law and by what they saw, the interception was the correct call. But I don't think that the interception is the reason why McDermott got fired. I think that the fact that they didn't stop them on the ensuing drive or didn't score and didn't win it in regulation is why McDermott would have gotten fired. I don't think the interception had that much to play on it. That wasn't the fine line that they're calling it as.
Really?
Whoa.
Really?
Hey, I mean,
Pelissero, Mike Garafolo, Rappaport, all of them.
Does he want to coach this year? Is he getting interviews immediately? I don't know.
Diana Rossini now, too. I don't see anything about Beane. So, McDermott.
Wow.
And it's on ESPN right now.
Well, I mean, listen, everybody's got it. Sal, come on in. I mean,
yeah, give his mic up.
Sal, wherever you want to sit. Okay.
I mean, I can stand too here.
Yeah, sure. Sean McDermott has been fired by the Buffalo Bills.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I'm in total and utter shock.
Okay, me too. So just so y'all know, I was literally down in another studio doing It's Always Game Day in Buffalo, and Matt Bove says on the podcast, hey, of all the things to lay this loss on, Sean McDermott's the least of them.
Yeah.
And as soon as he said that, he said, we have breaking news right now on the podcast. Sean McDermott's been fired. So Sean McDermott out as Bills head coach, according to Ian Rappaport, according to Adam Schefter.
I don't know if I would say the least responsible person for that Bills loss to the Broncos was Sean McDermott. Like, I don't think he was the sole reason they lost that game per se. I don't think that was I wouldn't call it that. I wouldn't say that he was blameless, nor was he the most to blame. I do think that he is more than the fact that the defense. I already said you're on your fifth cornerback and your sixth safety. You can't really overcome a lot of that stuff. I don't know. I maybe would put more blame on Brady than McDermott, just because the end of the game sequence when you're in the fourth quarter, if you score a touchdown to take it and then go for you score a touchdown, you get a 7-point lead before the extra point is kicked. You then go for 2, you make it a 9-point game. The Broncos have under 2 minutes to score 9 points. As long as you cover that onside kick, you win. Josh dirts the ball, and it's that would have been maybe a screen that would have walked in for a touchdown. I do think Josh has a high level of blame for this game. Like, yeah, he was the reason that we were there and the reason why we ended up having it as close as it was. In addition to the defense playing out of their mind in the second half for the majority of the time. But I do think the 4 turnovers heavily impacted the way that game was played. So I don't think McDermott was, for that game specifically, I don't think McDermott was the one totally to blame there. But and like I said, I'm a McDermott fan. I think he's a good coach. I just feel like with the fact that he used to be the rock of the organization. He used to be the floor. He was the floor setter for the Buffalo Bills. Your current young core is now the floor setter. You no longer need a floor setter at coach. You need a guy to come in to be the ceiling raiser, to help Josh Allen be the ceiling raiser, take some of that off him. Whether it's going to be super forward thinking, high level defensive coach like a Mike McDonald was for the Seahawks this past year, or an offensive guy that allows Josh Allen to be the best version of himself while still having the good run game. I do think that you need to have somebody that comes in and makes it easier on Josh Allen to raise the ceiling to beyond where it currently sits. All right. Actually, hold on, Jim. Before I bring you on, I have to go get my earbuds because I've been doing this without them the whole time because I haven't had to talk to anybody. But this is Jim from the Mrs. Relevant podcast here on my channel twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. Last week, Jim, you can probably go ahead and have the floor while I go run downstairs and grab my earbuds. So I'll be right back. Go ahead, Jim.
Also, I've been listening to Owen yesterday and today. So one of the things that I guess I was surprised to see McDermott got fired, but then when you look at the data of how many head coaches win a Super Bowl after their first 9 years with a team, and the answer is 0. So it's actually, I believe that over-under number is 6. So once you get past 6 years with a team and you don't win a Super Bowl as a head coach, there's nobody that's won a Super Bowl if they didn't already go to one in their first 6. So McDermott was probably 2 years overdue. But with the roster reset, when the Diggs trade happened, I actually think that bought McDermott 2 more years because it would be harder to bring in a new coach when you have salary cap constraints. Like, this is the year where Buffalo has a little bit of cap room to maybe get some players that the new head coach wants. They can actually go out in free agency and get new players. I don't know that would have been true had McDermott been let go last season or the offseason before, just because from what the salary cap was. Second thing is Brandon Beane is definitely getting raked over social media. There's no doubt about it. I've listened to other Bills podcasts. How did McDermott get fired and Beane stay? And ultimately, being a general manager at the NFL level, I think has more job security than being a coach, right? You have more job security in the front office than you do as a coach. I think there's more accountability for the coach. Right or wrong, I think it's easier to change a coach than it is a general manager. And if we think back to prior to Beane being here, like Doug Whaley was swinging for the fences more than Beane was, right? Between like the trade up for Sammy Watkins, when if we just stayed put, we could have gotten OBJ, for example, right? That was a really good wide receiver class. Why do you have to trade up and give up a future first for Sammy Watkins, right? So if we look at like Marv Levy, Buddy Nix, and then Doug Whaley versus Brandon Beane, to me, it's night and day that Beane is better. The data also shows that Beane is a pretty good drafter. So, Owen, you and I are going to talk about this when we do our podcast tonight. But Buffalo has more players that it has drafted on its roster in a 3-year window than any team in the league.
Yeah, I mean, I went through, so part of the earlier rant I went on was that this whole stat that's come out, that it's like Brandon Beane has only 2 players in his 8 drafts that have made the Pro Bowl. I can't remember who the second one is. I know it's James Cook. No, it's not Deion Dawkins. Deion Dawkins was 2017. Who was the second player nominated to a Pro Bowl that Brandon Beane drafted? I know the whole stat is there's only 2.
Was it Benford?
Has he been to a Pro Bowl? I don't think he has been.
Well, and I'm asking. I actually saw that right before give me a minute. I'm pulling up one spreadsheet. Okay, so I have a spreadsheet up on one monitor, and let me go. It was in Joe Marino's Discord. So I'm going to Joe Marino's Discord right now.
Gotcha. Was it Dawson Knox? I think that might have been the other name.
So Dawson Knox may have gone to a Pro Bowl. You are correct. But either way, okay, so I've said it before. The biggest difference between the Bills and the Chiefs is that Brandon Beane hasn't drafted enough All-Pros.
Right, but like I think that's definitely correct. But also, wouldn't you agree that some of these players that should have been given like these accolades were drafted already? Like going back, so because Beane was 2018 drafted on, 2017 was McDermott, which that was a really good point. So if you didn't listen to Joe Marino's podcast from the Instant Reactions, was like that McDermott should be pissed because the one offseason that he ran the ship, he signed Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, and then he drafted Deion Dawkins and Trey White and Matt Milano. It's like, okay, he had a really good, elite offseason his 1 year he ran the ship. But like moving forward, because Beane drafted Teron Johnson, who was at one time the best slot corner, nickel corner.
Maybe
in the
that
NFL.
was the other Pro Bowler.
Could have been. I don't know if he has made one though. So like,
I don't know.
Drafted Teron Johnson.
That that's the right metric. So it's data that's real, but I don't know that that's how you measure, right? Because so you trade for Diggs and Diggs makes the Pro Bowl. You don't get any credit for drafting Diggs because you weren't the one that drafted him. And that's where I think that this is a slippery slope, because I think Beane drafted a pretty good roster. Year in, year out, just to give you an idea as to like what some of the data is. Buffalo has 18 players that were on both the 2022 roster and the 2025 roster. Okay, that's 18. The Chiefs have 17. The Ravens, 16. Then there's a bunch of teams that are double digits that would include the Colts, Buccaneers, Packers, Giants, Eagles, Jaguars, Lions, Broncos. And the reason I point this data out is this data is a really good predictor of stability. Meaning that, like, Owen, to your point, I remember watching your podcast, I want to say it was on the Sunday after the season ended, where you're saying the floor of this roster right now is losing in the divisional round. This is the data that proves that floor exists.
Right.
It's a solid roster, and the core changes. So one of the things, and I was chiming in when you were podcasting earlier today, I don't believe in keeping players on the roster for 7 years. There's very few players that are on the roster here at the end of the 2025 season that should be on the roster in 2032.
Oh no, I definitely agree with that. It was more so like you have players that are in their mid-20s right now, where like your previous core, and I think 7 was a bit aggressive number. I was more saying that for like Josh Allen's age, resetting the rosters to the point where you can then keep going for the next however many years until Josh Allen starts to fall off out of his prime. But like you had your previous core was aging out, and now you reestablish a new core of players that are signed. And like you said, we have that floor of a roster drafted by Brandon Beane that is divisional round floor. And now you're going into an offseason where you have zero dead cap against the 2027 cap. So you can tap into that for futures and contracts with void years and things like that. You previously had a ton. Like you had 75, then 37, and this offseason is 35. You now have zero. So you have that established floor with players that you drafted and established, and now they're signed to long-term contracts for the next 4 or 5 seasons. And now you can go and use that new acquired capital and new acquired freedom you had, because now you're in the back half of that, or you're in the last year of that 3-year plan where retool, reconfigure all your cap stuff, explode in this offseason to add to that core. So now you're going past your floor of being a divisional round playoff team to now maybe being a Super Bowl winning playoff team with the moves you make this offseason.
Yeah, and I caught that, like, because obviously I was feeding information into the chat. I couldn't necessarily speak in complete sentences, right? But one of the things that I'd like to point out, right, is if you look, like, the Rams are going to be a great example, right? So on the Thursday podcast for Draft Professor this week, we're going to break down where the Rams were 3 years ago and where the Rams are today. Think about that one for a minute, right? Because the Rams 4 years ago we're in a Super Bowl.
Right.
Right. So where were they 3 years ago? You remember what the Rams had to do after they won the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, that was the year where everyone walked. They had like 12 draft picks starting for them or whatever, like 12, like a ton of rookies, especially on defense.
Right. So, Leonard Floyd was on that team. They had to let him walk. Von Miller was on that team. They had to let him walk. Sammy Watkins was on that team. They had to let him walk. I don't know that Tyler Rapp was on that team. I don't know that he had to walk immediately, but eventually Tyler Rapp, to the best of my knowledge, was on that Rams Super Bowl team.
Yeah, Taylor Rapp was on
Right.
that team. I don't know if he was a starter for them, but he was definitely on that team.
Right. So the Rams had this roster. They had to tear it down and they had to build it back up, and they're already further than where Buffalo was. Right, because Buffalo lost in the divisional round or in the AFC Championship that year.
Yeah.
Right. I think we lost in the divisional round to the Bengals. I believe that was the year we lost because that was who the Rams played in the Super Bowl. But the point being is that, so if you look 4 years for the Rams, the only player that's duplicate from one roster to the next over 4 years is Matthew Stafford.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The year where they took a dip, I think that's what the difference between what happened with the Rams and what happened with the Bills is. The Rams are now in the AFC or the NFC Championship game, and they had that. They won a Super Bowl, and then they cratered. Stafford was hurt. They had to let a bunch of guys walk. And then like last year, people saw them as a kind of a dark horse team, but then like this year, this is the year people were like, oh, they're a great team. The year where they cratered and had a bunch of young players starting for them on defense was the same thing the Bills did, except the Bills made the AFC Championship game the year that they did that instead of missing the playoffs because their quarterback got hurt. So the expectations for both teams were totally different. No one was saying like, oh, the Rams expectations are make it to the Super Bowl, or Les Snead, I think is their GM. Yep. He's fired. No, it was like, oh, well, we bottomed out. Now we're slowly building our way back up. Like that was how because it was more organic. Now people are calling for Brandon Beane's head because they did the same thing the Rams did, but because they didn't ever lose ground in where they ended up finishing their season, the expectations stayed high. We should have sent our 2026 first for Jalen Waddle, even though no one else was offering that to them anyway. Or we should have sent it for Quinnen Williams, which is what the original plan was. It's like you wanted them to make these big swing moves to mortgage futures to win for this season, when this season was never the season for them to want to win.
And to build on that, Brandon Beane said nobody wanted to trade with him. So we have to keep this in mind, right? There are teams that will not trade with Buffalo. So Buffalo offered more for Quinnen Williams than the Cowboys did. And the Jets traded Quinnen Williams to the Cowboys because they didn't want to trade him in the division. Same thing with Jalen Waddle. The Dolphins held on to him. Buffalo offered, to the best of my knowledge, I heard that was a 2027 first. Yes. And the Dolphins said no, right? So there was a report I read literally 10 minutes before coming live that said that there was a meeting 5 weeks ago with Terry Pagula, Brandon Beane, and Sean McDermott. And McDermott said, this is what's missing on the roster to win a Super Bowl. And Pagula and Beane didn't like the tone of that meeting. So it probably became like Beane. McDermott knew it was Super Bowl or bust. He didn't make it. If the exit interview or firing him only took 7 minutes, I don't think McDermott was surprised.
No. I think that meeting probably spelled the cards of like, okay, you want to take that tone of, oh, we need this to win a Super Bowl. All right, well, the tone of which you said they didn't really enjoy. They weren't a fan of the tone of that, which sounds like that means Pagula and Beane were pretty much in lockstep. If you're McDermott, you're thinking, okay, I have to either win the Super Bowl or I'm gone. I've probably just written my own fate in the cards there. And when it didn't happen, it was like, all right, cool. I'm gonna go do it with I would have said the Titans, but they just went with Robert Saleh. I'm trying to think of like what's a good place for. I think McDermott could be one of those coaches that if he gets enough power in an organization, could be that Bill Belichick style where he's doing player personnel decisions as well as being the coach. Because in that one offseason where he did have to run the ship himself because Doug Willie was basically there in title only. He did a phenomenal job of building the key core for this team moving forward. But I don't know if like there's any opportunities right now where there's a team that has either GM that's willing to let a guy come in and take over a lot of share of what they do, or if there's a team that's missing both pieces that he can come in and take over. I would have thought the Titans would have been a good one, but they just hired Saleh. I'm not sure who else is really a prime candidate for him to go take over as the coach there.
Well, somebody did ask me this in Twitter, and I've expanded my list. So I think McDermott landing in Pittsburgh or Cleveland would make a lot of sense. The difference is Cleveland has Andrew Berry, so there would be a power struggle there. I don't think that would be McDermott's top choice.
Probably.
But
no.
I think given where Cleveland's defense is today, right, giving McDermott a Myles Garrett level player would just kind of solidify where he is in the defensive guru rankings in the NFL.
Yeah, I never thought he was a bad defensive coach. I love the idea of him going to a team like, well, the Browns are one because they need to establish a winning culture. Like they have talent, they just can't ever get string enough along the winning to do that. And there's always been like whether it was the Sean Watson stuff. I know there was drama with Jerry Jeudy and Steve Smith. Like there was a ton of stuff that's like it was kind of preventing them from coming together as a team. And you never really got the vibe of like the Browns are a team that is well run or has that sense of togetherness that like maybe the Bills had when McDermott first took over and established that culture. Similar with the Steelers, I think Tomlin had that in a way, especially when he came to like you saw how many diva receivers would go through that system or how many guys that would go through that would then flame on other teams. Like there was a culture there. It just ran stale. So I do think those are two teams that you named that are pretty good places for him to go, especially with his acumen for creating a culture and getting the best out of defenses. I think schematically, the Browns are better off than the Steelers are right now with how structured the defense is on Pittsburgh with the style of players they have, plus the contracts that are kind of locking them into them playing there. But I do think that those are two really good options for him to go to. I just can't think of like another team that's like not great. Like he wouldn't go to the Ravens. I'm trying to think of another team that's like maybe on the lower end of the half of the league that kind of just needs that infusion of culture for that McDermott.
I didn't think of the Raiders yesterday, but I thought of the Raiders today. So I like McDermott to the Raiders. You would be getting the first overall pick. The Raiders roster is pretty much in shambles. So I do think like McDermott to the Raiders does make a decent amount of sense. And then I believe the other team I was thinking was the Cardinals. But one of the things to consider, right, and we're going to be dealing with this with the Buffalo coaching search, is that if your last head coach was a defensive coach, you likely want your next head coach to be on offense. So that would mean that McDermott being a defensive coach, if he's replacing an offensive head coach, Cleveland would be a better fit than Arizona. Yeah. Right? Because Arizona had a defensive coach there, and it's the offense in Arizona. I mean, the defense has a lot of young talent on it, but the offense in Arizona is where the next increment of improvement needs to be.
Yeah, I do think Arizona would be like looking at the players they have and looking at what they do need from their next head coach. I think Arizona could be a good fit for him. You're right. Most of the time, teams will flip-flop on what their coach's philosophy is going from one season to the next. So if that is the case and that's super impactful for a team like Arizona, like they need to go offensive guy, then I don't think McDermott can get the job there. But if I'm him, especially with how Arizona is and how their GM has kind of been a non-factor a lot of the times, like where their GM, I think they're holding over the GM, if I'm not mistaken, from last search. But if you come in and he's already on the hot seat, you have an opportunity to come in and perform well enough as a coach, and then that GM gets gone to have that ability to take as much power as you want in that organization. So I to be honest with you, of all the stops we've named so far, Arizona is like the one that's calling to me the most for where McDermott could land and really like be the best version of himself for a team next year.
Yeah, and I don't think McDermott's going to be out of work long because like there were even people in my feed that were saying he'd be a great defensive coordinator in Green Bay.
I think he's going to be a head coach. I don't think he's going to go backwards. A lot of coaches will, especially when they leave head coaching jobs or get fired from head coaching jobs, and like Robert Saleh did for a year, or you have a ton of guys that are going to. I think Mike McDaniel is going to be someone's offensive coordinator this year. I think that'll be where he's going to be a guy who's going to take a step back, because his problem was being that kind of leader of a team, not so much schematically. I think McDermott, the number one thing he brings is his leadership qualities, as a leader of men on a football team. So you don't want that type of guy coming in and conflicting with the current head coach as like a DC. I think that is the skill. That is a personality type that is going to be a head coach moving forward from now on. He's going to be like Mike McCarthy-esque, where he's going to get another job, but if he's not working as a head coach, he might be like a consultant or working in a front office waiting for his next head coaching position. I don't think you're going to be able to bring him in as like a prime like defensive coordinator type spot without having some conflict where players are going to be more loyal to him over the head coach at some points, because he's just that magnetic cult of personality type person.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, it's difficult to take a step back. And, in all the different, you and I are in so many different group texts together, and we're like bouncing things off of each other. When this happened, I was like thinking, well, is Norv Turner still available? But like Norv Turner he's probably been out of coaching for 15 years. But I would love for Josh Allen to play in a Norv Turner offense. Why would I not, right? And if anybody doesn't know who Norv Turner is, he was the offensive coordinator for the 2 Dallas Cowboys teams that beat Buffalo in the Super Bowl. He became a head coach of the Washington Redskins, and he was head coach of a different team. I think it was the Raiders. And he was also the offensive coordinator for Phillip Rivers and LaDainian Tomlinson. So he was a offensive genius, but failed head coach, if that makes any sense. But I'm all on board right now with Kubiak as the head coach, Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator, and then bring in Davis Webb to be the offensive coordinator. That way you have somebody that can bridge the new head coach with Josh Allen.
I like that idea. So that's where I was going to go with next, is what's your favorite candidate positions? And I don't know. I love that because Schwartz as a DC and Kubiak as head coach would be like phenomenal. But I'm not sure if Schwartz meshes well with that current Seahawks defensive philosophy. Because like the idea of bringing in Kubiak, and he's one of my top 3 candidates, is the current way that defense is being played. The best way, or the number one meta, I would say, using a video game term, the number one meta for defense being played in the NFL right now is that Mike McDonald, multiple front, heavy pressure, simulated pressure with blitzes, what the Ravens had done for years with, and you see that with Jesse Minter and the Chargers. You see that with Mike McDonald and the Seahawks. There's a bunch of teams right now that are moving towards that style of defense being played. And Jim Schwartz is a lot more of the even front, rush with 4, play base, mixing in some nickel, but winning with your defensive front more so than generating pressure through blitzes and designed pressure looks kind of thing. That was even the case when he was the coordinator for 1 year with the Bills. So, the reason I love Clint Kubiak is because he could bring along assistants with you from his time in Seattle that know that system, and then you're importing that defense over with him on top of him coming over and being the offensive mind. For the Bills, I think bringing Davis Webb in any way, shape, or form as either the offensive coordinator or the head coach is what you need to do. I think he needs to be on this Bills staff moving forward, regardless of where it is on the staff. I just don't think he's going to take a step back. I think the jump from passing game coordinator to head coach is too much. But I do think that he's a guy that needs to be brought in. But yeah. We'll jump into the coaches in a second, because there is a lot of players on the roster that I don't think fit with certain schemes, and then something with others. So to establish that first, we can let's go over some of the players that are under contract, so we can talk about the schemes that we can go into here.
Yeah, so I have a spreadsheet where I've copied the Pro Football Reference roster in, and like I had just mentioned to you in the private chat. If you were to think of Christian Benford and Terrell Bernard, these are players that Beane gave extensions to. I'm making an assumption. The first assumption is when Beane and the front office give a player an extension, that McDermott signed off on it.
I would assume, at least, even though Beane was fighting for more of the power, that would still, you would still want to be operating at a level where you're not undercutting your coach in every single move that you make. So I'd assume so, yes.
Yeah. So, like, if you were to look at Christian Benford, is there a style of defense that you think that we would avoid if he was the corner?
He's a player that I think is talented enough to transcend scheme, where he can play in man because he's big and physical and can bump and run with receivers. His greatest skill is being his own corner because he can drive and tackle. So I think that the scheme that he was currently in with the Bills is why he excelled so much, because that plays into what he does. But I also think because they ran a lot more man this year, he's not uncomfortable in those positions regardless. So I think he is a player that is scheme transcendent. I maybe wouldn't want him to be the old Legion of Boom Seahawks, the Dan Quinn cover 3 corner where you're emphasizing length and speed, and it's a lot of off zone where the cover 3 basically turns into, if you have a deep route, off cover man. I don't think that's where he excels the most, but I wouldn't say he's not a player that can fit into most schemes.
That was my expectation, but I like that. The next one would be Terrell Bernard, right? So he's definitely not really a true Mike. So I think this would be an example. I think Bernard's a great example of, well, we were already saying that he should be moved to off ball with Milano's contract expiring. Do you think if Bernard is off ball, and not the Mike, that he's scheme independent, or do you think that there's certain schemes we couldn't run if Bernard was still on the roster?
I think he's one of those players that, with an odd front scheme where you're required to have 4 off-ball backers, but one usually rotates down to be like your rush outside backer, like an odd front scheme with 4 backers, 3 down linemen. There's not really a clean spot for him because you really want 2 more of those typical Mike styles to be your 2 middle backers and then 2 rush style backers on the outside. Now you could always have more of a matchup style player like a Bernard fit in there. So I don't think that excludes it, but if he's scheme transcendent if he is a Will. I don't think he's a Mike in any scheme other than the McDermott scheme. And even then we were still arguing that he shouldn't be the Mike. You need somebody who's more Tremaine Edmonds than Terrell Bernard in that position.
Okay. And then at this point, I'm scrolling down the roster. I think Epinesa is a free agent, not important.
Yeah.
Maxwell Hairston, as a corner, do you think that he could play in nearly any scheme of whoever the new defensive coordinator is?
I think he's another one of those guys that, and why I thought that pick was good. So I got into an argument at the bar with my buddies the night after the game ended, because this was before McDermott got fired, and we were arguing whether or not Beane was good or not. And I was on the defense that he is a good GM, where they were like, if you're doing a retool year, where are all the players that you should have been adding in a retool year that should have been showing up? And I would argue that there were them, especially from this past draft class. I think the 2025 draft class was phenomenal. I'm not sure if you saw this, but Deion Walker was just named PFW's all-rookie team as a defense tackle. Well-deserved there. And I think one of the picks that, and like what my buddies were arguing were like, if Sean McDermott was like this DB whisperer and can turn Dane Jackson into a rotational starting corner for the Buffalo Bills as a 7th-round pick, why do you draft a first-round corner instead of like a wide receiver there? And in my opinion, it was like, because Maxwell Harrison is one of those players that is scheme transcendent because he has the athleticism to play in man coverage and run with guys and change direction and keep in their hip pocket. Can also play in those deeper zones because you're asking him basically to play off man coverage for most of the time, even if it is cover 3. And he is a guy that, if you ignore the 2024 talking points when he had the injured shoulder, he's a guy who's able to tackle in shorter zones. Like, I don't think that's going to be a major hindrance to him. So I think he's another guy that his skill set, he's maybe not developed enough mentally or to the speed of the game yet to be considered like a scheme transcendent number 2 corner. But I do think his skill set itself is scheme transcendent. He needs to be put into a scheme and then develop into it as much. I think Christian Benford's further along when it comes to playing that speed of NFL football.
Yeah, and we have more players to go through, but you're already establishing what I would consider to be a pretty good theme, Owen. And that's Beane has done a good job drafting because these picks that we've extended, it doesn't matter what type of scheme the next head coach brings in. The core of players is there. Right. Like if Bernard gets cut, it wouldn't shock me, but I don't think Bernard's going to get cut with a new head coach coming in.
No, I think the fact that, because you're already losing some leadership with McDermott leaving, I would wager say you'd be committing a war crime if you cut Terrell Bernard and losing that. Also, his cap hit currently for this upcoming season, so the 2027 season, is actually, you could cut him, I guess, because right now, for this past season, the 2026 season, he was a $5.472 million cap hit, and if you cut him, it would have been 11.8 dead cap, so it doesn't make any sense. You'd be gaining $6 million on your cap, or losing $6 million, I guess. And then this upcoming season, it jumps to 11.15, and then if you cut him, it's $3.6 million in dead cap. So you could save $8 million in your cap by cutting Terrell Bernard. But I think for him being a leader on that defense, you're losing leadership in McDermott leaving. You need to have these guys who are under contract and still in your leadership core from the previous regime to kind of smooth over the transition to the new coach. So he's a player that I don't think in any way, shape, or form is going to be moved. And that's good, because I do think as a will, he can be a player that is transcendent regardless of who comes in.
So this is where I think things may get a little dicier, and that's on the defensive line. So one of the questions that I have, and I sent this into Joe Marino, but we can talk about it now too, is do you think the defensive tackle archetype was Brandon Beane? Do you think it was Leslie Frazier? Do you think it was Mike Babich? Or do you think it was Sean McDermott? Who wanted that 305 pound penetrating defensive tackle?
I think that was a McDermott special, whereas like everyone else who signed up to work with him, whether it was Leslie Frazier or Bobby Babich, they wanted to you would come into it and expect to have that level player. Even when they brought in, I'm forgetting the guy's name, he was the D-line coach this past season. He was the defensive coordinator for the Jags the year prior. You saw some different stylization when it came to how the defense was played, but they still were working with those penetration style D-line. Even if their D-line stayed completely healthy, it was going to be Oliver, Jones, Dwayne Carter, and then the two rookies they brought in this year. So I think that was them playing into McDermott's preferences with that positional group. So I do think that those skill sets aren't translatable overall across schemes, but some of the players, especially the rookies you have with TJ Sanders and Deion Walker, those ones are scheme dependent, but I think they're young enough that you could probably work them into something else.
Well, you see, and that was where I was. So the next two players I was going to bring up were Dwayne Carter and TJ Sanders, right? Because these are, some people are calling Carter a bust. He hasn't really done anything in the 2 years he's been on the roster. But was he stuck in a bad scheme for his skills with McDermott?
I could see it. I think he was a guy who was super athletic, underweight, like you said, like hovering around 300. Same with TJ Sanders, where the whole point of their skill sets was gap shooting, pass rush winning, having some good bend and twitch and ability to win through gaps in the interior as opposed to playing through chests. I do think a lot of teams that run even fronts, those are going to be what your three techs are going to do. Like, you're going to have some run defending three techs that come out, like a Ty Hamilton last year or like a Caden McDonald this year. If he's not playing, he can play both 1 and 3 tech. But you don't have, when you're designing that defense, that 3 tech is going to be the player that's like you're hoping to have on the weak side of the strength. And when it is a passing down, they're the ones who are going to be your disruptors. You're at Oliver's of the world. So even though I think that those players were in a scheme that benefited them and maybe they just weren't developed enough. Dwayne Carter, as a rookie, struggled and then was out all this season. TJ Sanders struggled as an edge for this team, but I did think he had flashes as a D tackle. Still a rookie, though. I don't think he was someone that you're looking for being a consistent starter, especially when rotating in for as much as they did and how much he wasn't allowed to play and develop at D tackle this season. So their skill sets I don't think were misused per se, but they definitely can grow into becoming more consistent players in that same skill set or it's in that same scheme.
Yeah, because Carter, when he was a rookie, if I remember understanding things correctly, he was being used to spell Daquan Jones at the one tech, but Carter isn't really, he doesn't have the strength to hold up at the point of attack. So I look at that as on draft day, I had a feeling McDermott Beane went and got a McDermott player. He got a player for his coach because that was the archetype that McDermott wanted. But then he got misused once he was on the roster because I don't know how Carter was deployed as a rookie because, every year Buffalo's has defensive tackle injuries, right? So we've seen Jordan Phillips play on the nose. We've seen Dwayne Carter play on the nose. And even Deion Walker this year, and that wasn't what the scouting report on Walker was. He wasn't somebody you necessarily wanted to play, straight up hold down the point of attack. I think that there's some fundamentals here. If we just examine the defensive line scheme of whoever the new head coach is to what McDermott did, I think that's going to be the single biggest difference on the roster.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said. I don't think they have a true one tech, especially with Daquan Jones being a free agent. Like I'm curious to see if Dwayne Carter is on this roster come opening week next year, because he was clearly like a McDermott special at D tackle, and now I prefer Ed Alvarez at 3 tech. If you're going to do an even front, let's play in the world where they bring in, a coach that runs either the Seattle Mike McDonald style or the Jim Schwartz style or something like with an even front defense, preferably where there's 3 techs. You have Ed Alvarez, your starting 3 tech. TJ Sanders is your backup 3 tech. And in most scenarios, Deion Walker should be a 3 tech. Like, I know he's big, but like his skill set and what he lacks and with functional strength and core strength is not what a 1 tech is in most defensive schemes. I think that was a McDermott special of him being a nose tackle. So for me, I think Dwayne Carter is going to be a player that needs to, if there's 4 3 techs on your team and no 1 techs, I think you need to move on from Dwayne Carter if you don't like him more so than either of those rookies or at Oliver, which why would you?
And then how about Gregory Rousseau? So, there's a lot of people that are criticizing, Brandon Beane hasn't drafted an edge that's gotten a sack in a playoff game, right? I think you and I have seen that.
Yeah.
Do you think Greg Rousseau as an edge would fit, whether it's a Flory scheme, a McDonald scheme, a Schwartz scheme? Do you think he is the type of edge that could be used in multiple systems?
I think he is. What's great about Rousseau is he has that floor where if he's in an even front scheme, so your Schwartz, your McDonald's, he's going to be your base end that you want on. If you're flipping ends, he's your strong side end. If not, he's just going to be a consistent, even as like the amount of backside defensive end plays that went, like Andre Jones, Joey Bosa were god awful at closing the gap and squeezing the runs from the backside. You're left unblocked because they're running zone to the left, and your guys do the job and plug it up, making them have to cut all the way back across the formation. You should be there closing that gap and making that tackle for loss every time. Joey Bosa whiffed on a big one against the Broncos. Andre Jones whiffed on a big one against the Jags. It was such untechnically sound defensive run defending from your defensive ends that you'll never say with Greg Rousseau, both as an edge setter and as a guy playing from the backside. His length and power translates to multiple schemes. Even like in a Flores scheme where you're going to have more of an odd front, he can be a 5 tech. He has the length and the strength to be like a 280-pound 5 tech for that scheme. So I think he is low ceiling, but he is high floor scheme versatile player. He can play in multiple different fronts as a player either head up on a tackle or on the outside shade of one.
Okay, how about Dorian Williams? Right, so he's a reserve linebacker, and with Milano not under contract, Dorian Williams, I'm just going to say, is assimilating into the starting lineup on the depth chart pending free agency in the draft. When you look at like a Flory scheme or you look at a McDonald scheme or a Schwartz scheme, do you think Dorian Williams, do you think his skill set translates schemes, or do you think he needs to be specifically deployed in maybe not every scheme, or how do you see Dorian Williams?
So I think this one's more of a loaded question because
yes, it is.
On most teams, he's not a reserve linebacker. I think most teams that most even front teams that run even fronts run a lot more base than the Buffalo Bills did. And when your team, if we were to run base at like a 50-50 rate or like 60-40 or something like that, Dorian Williams would be on the field significantly more as the sand linebacker, where he is, you flip the backers to the strong side. He's the one coming downhill. His primary job is to fit the run first and then be like an accentuary, either zone coverage drop player, but in most other times as a pass rusher or as a QB spy. Like that was his job. And I think a lot of teams have that utilization. They can utilize that skill set. And especially like a Flores scheme, I think as in a Flores scheme and a Mike McDonald scheme, as a player that can be that delayed blitzer, or even like, especially like Chiefs with Spagnuolo, like the way that those teams that can blitz creatively can utilize him a lot more than what the Bills did. And especially teams that run base 3 linebackers could utilize him a lot more than the Bills did. I think he was one of those players that the skill set is always going to be useful for any team, but he was the least useful for a McDermott scheme where they didn't really utilize that style of backer all that much. So I think he's a guy that, while skill set is scheme transcendent, the need or the amount of snaps per scheme is going to vary depending on who you have and what they value.
This is where I would give evidence that I think Beane is a good drafter. Right, you listing, hey, these players should be able to fit a new scheme coming in. People may not like the fact, to our point when we started talking about this, that Beane hasn't drafted enough Pro Bowlers or All Pros. That's a true statement. But if you look at the players that are under contract, I think any defensive coordinator is going to like the group of players they're inheriting. They're going to be able to use them. They may have to retool. Dorian Williams might have a slightly different position in the scheme, but I think he's going to make it onto the field. And, from a Brandon Beane standpoint, that will actually make Brandon Beane look better because one of his 3rd-round picks is now getting more playing time.
Yeah, I think there's easily a scenario where a new coach comes in next year, and a lot of the players that people have been waiting, like Cole Bishop, Dorian Williams, even Dwayne Carter if he's still around, but even the 2 rookie D tackles with TJ Sanders, there's going to be a scenario where a lot of these players that got drafted with higher valued picks come in and do better just because that's how the natural development curve goes, and the defense they'll be put into will implement their skill sets differently and maybe better. And we'll come out with a seeing like, oh, we'll see McDermott was the problem. There is a very realistic scenario where that is what happens. And then I would be sitting here like, wow, or there'll be things like, oh, McDermott was clearly the problem. That's why they couldn't get over the top. I would feel bad for him because I do think that he was a good coach, but at the same time, it's not a wrong opinion to have. But there's also a realistic scenario where it's like, oh, okay, well, I think a lot less realistic is that, oh, they are just that bad. But I don't think that's the case. I think if you watched Bills football consistently this year and understand how the scheme worked and fit these players into it, I do think that those players specifically will have the ability to write that narrative of Beane doesn't know how to draft with these 2nd and 3rd round picks, especially those players we named already.
So one of the other thoughts, I haven't put this out on Twitter yet, but I was thinking about it. Is Sean McDermott this generation's Marty Schottenheimer? Now, I might be dating myself because were you even old enough to watch football when Marty Schottenheimer was alive and coaching?
I've watched videos covering him, but no, I know his time with the Redskins and the Chargers. I think it was Redskins he coach for.
No, you have 2 of the teams right. There's more, but keep going.
It was a thing where he would come in. It's kind of similar to the John Tortorella effect in hockey, or not John Tortorella. It was what was his name? There was another coach. There was a similar coach where he would come in, Mike Keenan. That's who it is. he would come in and be like a phenomenal coach and get winning seasons out of it. Like, didn't he get fired after like a 14-2 season at one point, Schottenheimer?
Yes, he did.
Like that he comes in and like raises your team to a level of excellence that you can get to, but you can never finish the deal and close the deal on being able to finish it out. So I think with him, with Schottenheimer, from what I've researched about him and learned about him, that was more so either him getting screwed over by management, maybe what you could say happened to McDermott this year, but also maybe a personality thing where he just kind of rubbed people the wrong way. And he had winning ways. And this is where like the Mike Keenan or John Tortorella comparisons come to with hockey, where like they get results, but they rub people the wrong way in the process of doing it, and they run out of shelf life real quick. I don't know if that's McDermott per se, but I think the idea of him being a guy that can come in and get your team to a winning organization, but not to the point of winning over the top, taking over the top and winning, can be accurate.
Yeah. So for anybody listening, if you're not familiar with Marty Schottenheimer, he was a player for the Bills from 1965 to 1968, and ultimately he retired from football in 1971. So he had a 6-year career. And then he became head coach of the Cleveland Browns in 1984, and he took Cleveland to the playoffs. But that was all he did. Then he became head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs, and he took them to the playoffs. He was the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs when Joe Montana was the quarterback of the Chiefs. And that was actually a major change, because when Joe Montana was traded to the Chiefs, Joe Montana brought his quarterback coach with him to become the offensive coordinator under Marty Schottenheimer. Because Marty had they called it Marty ball. It was somewhere along 3 yards in a cloud of dust. His teams were tough. They competed. So that Chiefs team was eliminated in the AFC Championship game by Buffalo. Right? So Joe Montana's, I believe his last NFL game was Bruce Smith knocked him out of the game in the AFC Championship. He got leveled. Kind of thing. He coached the Washington Redskins for 1 year, to your point. He coached the San Diego Chargers from 2002 to 2006. And to your point, he was fired after a 14-2 season. So Marty Schottenheimer got 4 stops as a head coach, which is unheard of. Usually the max is 2, and on a rare occasion it's 3. But Marty's teams were always competitive. But there was just something missing about them. He never went to the Super Bowl. So I'm looking to see, does it tell me what his career coaching record is? And rest in peace, Marty Schottenheimer is since deceased. But his regular season coaching record is 200, 126, and 1. So how many coaches do you know have 200 career wins and have never gone to a Super Bowl?
Probably the same amount of time, same amount of coaches that have won 6 straight years of playoff wins and have won 3 straight Super Bowls.
Exactly. His postseason record is 5 wins and 13 losses. So, and that's all off of his Wikipedia page. But when McDermott got fired, I was thinking in terms of, is he Marty Schottenheimer? Buffalo needed to try something new. So it's a change for the sake of change. But I don't know how anybody would be able to say no to the Buffalo head coaching job unless the issue was the power struggle with Brandon Beane. But, you know, one of the other things I was thinking of, I don't know how old Terry Pegula is, but my instinct is that he's in his 70s, might be pushing into his 80s.
He is currently 74.
Yeah. So if we think of how this team was operated by Ralph Wilson in, let's say, the last 15 years of Ralph Wilson's life, right? So Ralph Wilson owned the team, but he was aged. He wasn't going to be able to come to Buffalo to, watch games from the owner's box, right? That wasn't in the cards for Ralph Wilson. We're not that far from Terry Pegula being in a similar situation, in my opinion, meaning that Terry Pegula needs to put an organization in place where Terry Pegula doesn't need to deal with the day-to-day operations. So somebody was going to get that president of football operations. It had to be somebody. And I'd rather have that be somebody like Brandon Beane than Jim Overdorf.
Yeah,
right? I'd rather have it be somebody that more of a general manager background than a business background. But you have any thoughts on that, Owen?
Yeah, I think the fact is, I was live reacting to some of the other people covering the Brandon Beane stuff before you hopped on, Jim. And I kind of covered it also earlier in my rant when I first hopped onto this live stream, which was these teams are going to want, or a coach is going to want to have some level of power in his organization. Like, that was the problem. I think I would have preferred if Beane and McDermott could have just gotten along and, saying kumbaya and continued to play. I felt like the change that's going to happen to this organization before next season starts is going to be the amount of different players and talent you can infuse into the organization with the assets you now have available because of your retool. Like, I do think that would have been the change that people wanted for it. Now people are saying, like, well, something had to change, so one of McDermott or Beane had to go, and everyone was arguing that it should have been Beane over McDermott. I think you're correct when saying that having someone step in as the director of football operations, which is Brandon Beane now, it shouldn't prevent any coaches from wanting to come in, because that you still have Josh Allen at quarterback. You have all these assets to improve the roster. You want to make it. And yes, I think, and that was always the concern with like the Sabres too. Like, so Terry Pegula also owns the Buffalo Sabres. And for a long time, Kim Pegula, his wife, was the president of hockey operations for them, which was a major sticking point with the fan base. And then recently, with Kim's health complications, Terry took over that role. And now everyone was clamoring for a GM like Jarmo Kekalainen to come in who has GM experience, instead of it just being Kevin Adams, who was Terry's good friend. So Terry was still heavily involved. Now they've gone and got a player, someone in GM at Kekalainen that's going to be more hands-on. Similar thing is going to happen with Beane, where now Pegula doesn't need to be as involved with it. So Beane can make those overarching operational calls. But at the same time, if you're a coach looking at it, that can be something that scares you off because you're worried about how much power you're going to have. But also it can be something that's comforting. The stability of the organization isn't dependent on a 74-year-old owner making decisions and being present there. So you have a guy that we have already established since you've gone on that we think the draft criticism is overblown, and has established a core of players and now has set up the team to be able to make some big additions. And if one of the two had to go, it was going to be the guy that in McDermott that wouldn't have caused Terry to have to dive into doing a GM search himself, could just make it easier on him to then operate. So I do think the fact that Beane got the promotion, people are taking that as like oh my God, they're so stupid. Not only should they have fired not only should this guy have been fired, now they're promoting him. I think the promotion, if anything, just says more about what Terry's role needs to be moving forward, or wants it to be moving forward. But in addition, I don't think that's going to change as much as people think it's going to change when it comes to how the coaches are going to view this job opportunity.
So, Owen, I do have to run. I have dinner with my kids on Tuesdays, and I got to get back in time for our Tuesday night podcast. So,
real quick, remind me and the people watching what we're doing tonight for the Mr. Relevant podcast.
So on Draft Professor this week, most of the podcasts are going to be analyzing how specific teams that are still in it. So this week it's Denver, New England, the Rams, and the Seahawks. How did they build their roster? And specifically tonight we're doing Denver. So how did they manage their salary cap? How did they manage their draft? What free agents did they sign? And then what lessons can we look at Denver and say, my team didn't do this, but I want to be like Denver. Like, are they using their draft capital a different way type thing? And that was some of the data that I was sharing at the beginning. So I have data that I have collected for all teams. So I went through the rosters of every single NFL team. And for example, I can tell you the Denver Broncos have 27 players on their roster that they've drafted. And that's actually towards the bottom. Right? So like Buffalo has 37. Denver is 27. And Buffalo's close to the top. So 37 for Buffalo is the second highest. The only team with more players on their roster that were acquired by the draft was Baltimore.
Yeah.
Right. So there's more than enough data out there to show, how well different GMs draft. So if you want to see, like, just to give you an idea, if you're really bad, you only have 20. So the Jets only have 20 players on the roster that they drafted. So, like, that's your Mendoza line. If you're only at 20, you're not really, like, you don't have to try and you're going to have 20.
Right.
Kind of thing. So, and we'll be able to compare, for example, like the Patriots to the Broncos, if like they got there differently. I think one of the cool things about the playoffs this year is that the Final Four teams are different than they were last year. We're not talking about the Chiefs again. We're not talking about just insert Tom Brady team again. These are new teams. And I think fans like that. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as a fan that I'm standing in, I'm hoping that the NFC just wins it because of what happened with the Bills playoff ending. But like you're right, I do think that it's a bit of a fresher take than the years previous, despite the fact that it's now been 15 straight years of either the Chiefs or the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. This is a different Patriots team, so I do think that can still stand true. All right, Jim, if you have to head out, go ahead. I'm going to wrap this up soon anyway because I'm going to be gone live with Jim later. So we're going to take a bit of a break in a second. But
Owen, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure. And go Bills, and I'll see you at 9 o'clock tonight on Draft Professor.
Yep, see you tonight at 9. So just for a recap, because I know we have I changed the title of the stream a little bit and got some new viewers in. To recap, because I'm going to be signing off for a bit, as you just heard, there was a rant earlier in this video, or in this live stream. I'm going to edit it down a bit and turn it into a shorter YouTube video. I went for like 50-plus minutes on why I think Brandon Beane wasn't the problem, or at least isn't the main problem, and is why I think he was the correct decision to keep along as opposed to Sean McDermott. We went through all of his draft picks from 2020 to now, his free agency spending from 2020 to now. And I just want to sum it up with the fact that going back to that plan, after the 2023 season, it was agreed, moves were made, Diggs was traded, the safeties were gone, Matt Milano was going to restructure his contract soon. A lot of things occurred that you took on a ton of dead cap. I think Von Miller was cut that year. You took on a ton of dead cap in 2023, 2024, or 24, 2025. You took on $75 million in dead cap, which limited what you could spend. You spent the money you did have on retaining your core players who are currently there, what your Rousseaus, your Benfords, the current guys you would call the core of your offense and defense, Cook, Allen, etc. The tackles, Spencer Brown. You then you use whatever you could to add on to guys to maybe supplement what you've lost talent wise. You missed on a bunch like Curtis Samuel. Did bring in some guys, but for the most part, your big swings missed. I think Josh Palmer is still on the out, whether or not it's a question of whether or not he was a good addition. But for me, I think those are easily to be criticized. But I think the drafting has not been. And we agreed that this was going to be a 2-year process, taking on a dead cap, drafting a ton of players, getting spots on the roster for them to come in and get playing time. And then as we were expecting not to hit the same highs as we did previously. Similar to what the Rams did after they won the Super Bowl. They kind of bottomed out a bit to rebuild because they were getting old and expensive and couldn't retain a bunch of guys. The only difference between us and the Rams is we made the AFC Championship game that year. And then we made the AFC Divisional round again this year when we were supposed to do a similar thing of just retain our own, keep kicking the can down the road for adding players, but continue to solidify your core, get off of old contracts, free up dead cap. We are now in a position where this offseason, you have zero dead cap moving forward. $35 million dead cap this year, zero next year. You can then grab that dead cap to improve your roster moving forward with bigger, longer-term contracts for higher talented players in free agency. continue to add draft picks. Your second and third year players are going to continue to develop, and this rookie class, which was a good rookie class, is going to continue to develop and become starters for you. And you're going to have – Brandon Beane has not told a lie. He said 2 years in a row we're going to be lacking talent, but we're going to be able to solidify the floor of our roster. Then this year is going to be the year that all that pays off, and we're going to be able to make big additions and push for that Super Bowl again. Go all in. This is the all-in year. And the reason you fire McDermott over Beane right now is because Beane has been in lockstep with that plan and told the truth the entire time. McDermott differentiated from that plan, wanted to make some more short-term drastic situations to try to push for a Super Bowl this past season. And I'm assuming Pagula didn't very much agree with that. So now you're allowing a new coach to come in, have that established core that he's agreeing to take on, take the assets you now have to invest into the current roster to make them better. And instead of having McDermott stand for one more year, use those investments himself, and then now next year, whoever's going to come in to take over is now the person that's dealing with a bunch of contracts and players that they didn't sign off on. So that's my current stance. I think Brandon Beane was the right decision to go with for this offseason, but come the draft and come free agency, we're going to know real quick whether or not that was the right decision, personally. So come back later, 9 o'clock at night. I'm going to be streaming with Jim again. We're going to be doing our twice weekly Mr. Relevant podcast live stream. I'm going to cut up some of the clips from this to make true YouTube videos. So if you missed it, you can go back and watch that instead of watching this whole live stream. But thank you for everybody who came in, left comments, and participated. We had a pretty good spike in viewership there. So that's pretty nice. So we'll see you guys later tonight.